Chapter 1945. Who should be blamed for this sudden change? Lu Yuzi didn't seem to be in the wrong. He had good intentions, but he couldn't see through himself. But if it weren't for Lu Yuzi, would this purge organization not exist? Not necessarily. Was it the fault of the exterior immortal monarch behind the Jade Booklet? That didn't seem to be the case. He was also thinking for the future of the exterior immortal monarch. It would be better for a complete handover after the enforcers left. It would be beneficial for future work. No one was in the wrong, but now the situation was stuck here. No one could advance or retreat. Now, it was up to the immortal monarch's attitude. In history, there didn't seem to be any history of an immortal monarch compromising with a half-immortal. This was the dignity of an immortal. It couldn't be violated. Sure enough, the words at the top of the Jade Booklet changed. It was still tough and didn't change its original intention. Hand over register. This isn't a discussion with you. The entire exterior immortal monarch fell into a dead silence. Every exterior half-immortal stopped what they were doing, stopped cultivating, interrupted the Dharma conference, and withdrew from meditation. Those who were fighting also stopped fighting. Instead, they all paid attention to the Jade Booklet in their minds. To cultivators, this wasn't a trivial matter that was dispensable, and it was related to the vital interests of every single one of them. Privacy protection. This was also the most important aspect for cultivators. They couldn't be watched by the Jade Booklet just because they were in the exterior immortal monarch. This was the principle. It concerned the bottom line. It was the bottom line of a cultivator and also the bottom line of a person. To put it bluntly, if you didn't have any secrets, how could you stand out? But today, right now, the Jade Booklet was challenging their bottom line. This didn't seem to be right. The exterior immortal monarch wasn't a fixed immortal. The immortal court would choose who would be the immortal monarch and not the people below. There was also no need for a public announcement or a meeting. The huge gap in the level itself was a kind of pressure and also a necessary mystery. Therefore, no one knew how many immortal monarchs had changed in the past million years. No one knew their names. They just called them immortal monarchs or simply Jade Booklet. The Jade Booklet rarely directly ordered a half-immortal. There was no need and it wasn't equal. Usually, it would secretly achieve its goal through the 5 decay of the exterior immortal monarch. The Jade Booklet was in charge of the rankings. Who dared to disobey it? They all had to rush to curry favor with her, fearing that they wouldn't understand her well enough and wouldn't be able to slip away smoothly. However, if the Jade Book had truly expressed its opinion, then the half-immortals below it would have no choice but to comply. There would be no other choice. Throughout history, there were also cases of arrogant people who were disrespectful to immortal lords. Regardless of the reason, they were punished on the spot, and it was common for them to die. Inspector Liu was not a celestial being of the exterior, so he had the right to refute once. But since he was now in the exterior, he had to obey the immortal monarch's wishes. This was the privilege of the immortal. You can despise it, but please don't come to the exterior. Therefore, when Immortal Lord Jade Book reiterated his words, the outcome was basically decided. There was no more suspense. The list of the people who had participated in the Heart Compass sale numbered in the thousands. It would definitely be grasped by immortal monarch Lu Yuzi and the others. Then, it would become a sharp sword on the heads of all the half-immortals who had made mistakes. None of the interior cultivators had expected such a turn of events. From the initial success to the present failure on the verge of success. In terms of practical results, there was no doubt that their goal had been achieved. But in terms of mood, they did not have the slightest bit of joy. Because they had succeeded, but they had also been slapped in the face. Qing Xian knew this guy's temper and was afraid that he would be stubborn, so she hurriedly reminded him. Am I right? You fell into a trap, right? The kind that can't climb out. Don't be silly, the exterior immortal monarch will not be merciful to you. He might not kill you, but severe punishment is inevitable. And it will ultimately affect your path of Tao. You have to be clear about the severity. Even if you listen to him, the exterior cultivators will first resent immortal Lord Jade Book. You will be second. And you won't be the only one. With 41 of us carrying it together, the impact on each of us will be limited. Lu Xiaoyi gently shook his head. Qing Xian only knew one side of the story and did not know the other. In his current situation, on the path of gathering momentum, he could not leave any flaws on himself, whether it was physical or mental. Only then could he ensure that he would continue to move forward. Time was short, and he did not have the time to make up for this loss of state of mind. Moreover, was it really just a little impact? Immortals were high and mighty, and their dissatisfaction towards them would quickly fade away. Only they, who were also half-immortals, would be hated. And it was not just 141st, but he would have to bear the majority of it alone. He was the first seat. And there would be people adding fuel to the fire. He would not be able to escape the reputation of breaking his promise. The favorable impression of the exterior heaven half-immortal that he had painstakingly fought for would also be gone. No one would think that he was forced, and everyone would only say that he was in cahoots with the immortal monarch. He could not back down. Because he came from a special orthodoxy. Because he had a different ambition. He would not plead anymore. This was not a swordsman. He took a deep breath and removed the part of his memory related to the name list from the scroll of mental strength. Because this part of his memory had a mysterious connection with the Jade Book, the name that appeared on the Jade Book could not help but fluctuate, as if it would disappear at any time. At the same time, a line of words appeared behind his name on the Jade Book: the name list is gone. This kind of decisiveness was beyond everyone's expectations. It was as if the two of them were going against a bull. One was forcefully suppressing, the other was indomitable. However, one was an immortal, and the other was a half-immortal. Was the stubborn struggle of an ant meaningful? But what happened next told everyone that it was meaningful. Lu Xiaoyi did not speak, but Yan Qingxian immediately understood his meaning. This grandson was really a big disaster, and she could not be associated with him. Following that, Yanming used his mental power to erase the part of his memory about the list. At the same time, two words appeared after their names on the Jade Book that were starting to fade away. Gone. Duanli was almost on par with them, gone. North Wind, Qifan, Yudu, Sangung, Hong Tiangang, Huahu, Jiniao. Hands-free, marching monk. One by one, the interior enforcers expressed their attitudes on the Jade Booklet and erased their memories. Some of them were fired up, while others were helpless. There's nothing left. There were no heroic words. There was no heroic spirit. There were only 41 words that said gone, which shocked tens of thousands of exterior experts. At the same time, a burst of will spontaneously rose up and went straight to the brain. The exterior and exterior realm had been fighting for millions of years, and for the first time, the exterior experts had a feeling of admiration for the interior experts. This was the backbone of the ancient method. However, the present method was not a weakling. Lu Yuzi had been looking for a way to reverse the situation. He had waited, and finally, this opportunity came. After the interior enforcers expressed their attitude one by one, he finally gathered his courage and took the biggest risk of his life. Two words appeared under his name on the Jade Book: rejected. He was only faster by an instant. Soon after, all the exterior-level half-immortals had the same attitude behind their names: rejected. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. Until it covered the entire Jade Book. Not a single person did not express their opinion. This kind of momentum formed a torrential momentum that pierced through the exterior realm and rushed up to a high place. Chapter 1946. P.S. Looking for a guaranteed monthly ticket. For the first time in millions of years, the inner and outer scenic heavens stood together. Was it to fight against a celestial? No one would have thought that there was someone with such charisma. Such charisma. It made the half-celestials, who had always planned their cultivation career calmly, to be impulsive. Qing Xian had mixed feelings. This grandson was starting to show his prowess. Don't lead everyone astray. The marching monk's heart was dead. All his schemes were crushed into powder by the swordsman's unreasonable hot-bloodedness. He was an evil person, but he was building momentum for the other party. What was more terrifying was that such hot-bloodedness hid many far-reaching schemes. His attitude had been made clear. What was left was the Jade Booklet's judgment or punishment. The Jade Booklet continued to top, very good. Since you are persistent, you must know the price. Do you like to forget the past so much? Then I'll help you this time. I'll also let you know that the dignity of a celestial will never be challenged. The cloud of spiritual vigor that the interior enforcers had gathered abruptly exploded. 41 people were blown away without any resistance. They could not even control themselves. Among them, 40 accomplices were only blown away. They were directly blown out of the exterior heavens and were thrown into an unknown void of the universe. What followed was a long journey back. Only Lu Xiaoyi was added. When the spiritual clouds moved slightly, he knew something was wrong. Even if he was facing a celestial, he had to immediately unsheath his flying sword. However, the difference in strength between them was too big. This was also the exterior heavens, which was the Jade Booklet's territory. Before his flying sword could completely drill out of his nylon, he felt his mind go blank and then he lost consciousness. Even the exterior heavens and half-celestials could feel this power. This was the real power of a celestial. The power of heaven was unpredictable. Although they were not at the scene, they only saw the 41 names on the Jade Booklet. All of them were dim and then suddenly disappeared. That was the sign of being expelled from the exterior heavens. There was only one name, which was also the name at the front. It could no longer be described as dim. It simply melted into the background and turned into nothingness. It was the chief of the interior enforcers. They did not know whether this person was alive or dead. However, just by looking at the appearance of the name, it didn't seem to be a case of death, because there was no spiritual opportunity to release feedback. Combined with the words on the Jade Book, I'll help you erase your memories. The truth was very clear. This stubborn and uncompromising first seat had been erased from the past. This also means that a half-immortal without a past can only be a half-immortal forever. His Tao path was destroyed. Immortals' words were law. If they said they would destroy your past, they would definitely destroy it. Even if it was just a piece of the past, it was still indispensable for a cultivator to ascend to immortality. It meant that there would be a loophole in the past, present, and future. Heroes often end up like this. People might be moved for a moment, but they wouldn't be moved for a lifetime. The enforcers were exiled, leaving only the exterior half-immortals to await their punishment. Some people began to regret their impulsiveness just now. Now, the targets of punishment were not just the 200 people, but tens of thousands of people. Every exterior half-immortal was included. In an unknown place beyond the heavens, an old Taoist was lying on his side and taking a nap amidst the netherworld celestial phenomenon. With his hand supporting his chin, he was half awake. It was as if he had become one with the celestial phenomenon. Even if he was close, no one could feel a trace of his aura. He had been lying here for many years, and no one knew how many more years he would lie here. Every breath he took had become a part of the celestial phenomenon. Just as he was feeling contented, a loud voice sounded. Ghost Constellation Lord. Neglecting his duties and not being strict enough. Idling all day long and absent-minded. Causing the resentment in the interior and exterior heavens to soar to the heavens, directly to the celestial court. This person is hereby ordered to be stripped of his position as an exterior immortal monarch. He is to return to his home and await punishment. The old Taoist stretched lazily, clasped his hands to the heavens, and then disappeared. The next moment, Ghost Constellation Lord returned to his immortal palace in the Four Saints' heavens. Everything was as usual. He was a person who did not raise powerful pets, so he did not have any children, spiritual beasts, or immortal birds. He was all alone, and belonged to the category of people who kept a low profile in the Four Saints' heavens. However, although he kept a low profile, his position was not. An exterior heavenly immortal monarch had some weight in the Four Saints' heavens, and his position was higher than those immortal monarchs who were in charge of the four symbols heavens of the universe. This was because other immortals were in charge of the universe, while he was in charge of people. Even the immortal court paid great attention to the cultivation of future talents. As the cultivation base of half-immortals in the Four Saints' heavens of the universe, the exterior heavens had a certain status. He was able to sit in this position because he had a strong backing, but he had messed it up. Not long after he returned to the immortal palace, a divine will descended from the sky. It was his good friend who had some connections with him. Ghost Constellation, I heard you messed up the exterior heavens. As a human immortal, you shouldn't have done that. Tell me, what are you up to this time? Why did you take the initiative to leave this position? Ghost Constellation Lord laughed. I knew I couldn't hide it from you. Apothecary, you don't know how difficult it is to deal with those immortals in the lower realm. Each of them is a troublemaker. After thinking about it, rather than being stuck in the exterior heavens, I might as well take the initiative to leave this position and find a reason to make a mistake. Naturally. The divine will was faint. You don't mean what you say. Forget it, I can't be bothered to care about you. It's good that you're back. At this critical moment, it's better to stay in the Four Saints' heavens. Ghost Constellation agreed. Exactly. The great changes in the universe and the change of eras are the changes of dynasties in the mortal world. No matter how much credit you have, the most important thing is that you have to be present when the cake is divided. The consequences of having noble character and unquestionable integrity are usually not good. Moreover, we don't know which direction this change will take. Jiao Su and Do Su wanted to leave as well, but they were not as fast as me. The two old friends chatted for a while before leaving. Ghost Constellation Lord calmed himself down and meditated in silence. Did he give himself away in this operation? Neither he nor the apothecary mentioned the key person in this incident. However, it was precisely because they did not mention it that the two immortals were even more cautious. Was the Four Saints' heavens a place to talk nonsense? One had to think carefully even if they wanted to. Their idle chatter was just a cover-up. What they talked about was fake, and what they did not talk about was the real thing. The layout had begun. In the Four Saints' heavens, whether it was a human immortal or a genuine immortal, which one of them did not have a layout? Which one was truly resigned to adversity? It was just a different direction and a different point of leverage. Their group seemed to be led by the apothecary, but he also knew that there was a higher level of control above the apothecary. It was not something a human immortal like him could understand. The collapse of the 36 innate great Daos meant that the 36 golden immortals had to leave with the Tao. Therefore, before they left, they had to make countless arrangements, just to wait for the day they returned. However, the problem was that they had already given up their position. Who would be willing to welcome them back? Wouldn't it be better to take their own position? It was a complicated situation. Chapter 1947. The cultivators of the interior heaven were scattered and sent down the exterior heaven randomly, but they did not pass through the passage between the interior and exterior heaven. This was their punishment. Most of them were thrown into unfamiliar airspace, but this was not a problem for them, because no matter where they were, they could find the interior heaven. It was the same for Smoky End. Once she entered the interior heaven, she immediately contacted all her acquaintances to check who had returned to the interior heaven. Not only her, but also Qing Xian, Shi Yu, Bei Feng, and other friends of Lu Xiaoyi. They were not looking for Lu Xiaoyi's whereabouts, but for the marching monk. Once the killing intent arose, it could not be stopped. But several days had passed, and not only the marching monk, but also the freakish core figures of the Buddhist sect, including my auntie, had not returned. A few of them gathered together, and Qing Xian, as the most senior among them, advised, "Junior sister, don't wait any longer. If they don't return for several days, it means that they will not return to the interior heaven, and will return to the bounded domain through other means. They have a guilty conscience, and also do not want to start a vendetta in the interior heaven at this moment. I estimate that we will not see them for at least 100 years, and there is no need to feel regret. This is a game that will eventually meet, and no one can avoid it. What has been done must be repaid. As for little E, Smokey N shook her head and smiled bitterly. I am least worried about him. We were all present at that time, and know that the exterior celestial monarch was not killed, but he must have done something to little E. For a scourge like him, the most correct thing to do is to kill him on the spot. Giving him a chance to live is helping him grow. So I will not be surprised if he becomes a young god or a second Severance when he returns. I just hate those monks. They don't know what's important and don't care about the big picture. Senior brother Qing Xian, I still don't think we can let go so easily. How to catch them is another matter. But before that, we must expose their ugly faces of internal strife. Since we can't kill them for now, we will first destroy their reputation. Xiu smiled and said, Junior sister, don't worry. Senior brother Qing Xian is already making arrangements. We cannot say it directly, and it will be more convincing through a third party to confirm the Buddhist sex conspiracy, including the incident with Duanli and the others. The truth is the truth. But we still have to spread the truth as a conspiracy. Because in history, framing and framing would always last longer than the truth. Don't worry, the three pure ones are experts in this field. They've been promoting this for millions of years. Qing Xian glared at him. Junior martial brother Xiu, what are you saying? So you unparalleled supremes are all innocent people? That old bastard Chang Jin hasn't done much in the past few thousand years. Xiu retorted, a lot of it was that old bastard Qin Yangzi who came up with the plans, right? Do you know what the other realms called him after the battle at Heng River? He said that he shouldn't be called Qin Yangzi, but filthy intestines. Qing Xian was not at a disadvantage in terms of words. I see. I also heard that after the battle at Tu Guan, those foreign species changed the name of Chang Jin to Short Tongue. To commemorate his untrustworthiness. Your short tongue is mixed with your filthy intestines. Yin Sun was speechless and started fighting again. He didn't dare to persuade him because the leader of Shen Yuan also had an extremely unpleasant name. It was passed down through history, the monk who stirred shit. Why was it a staff instead of a staff? Because the structure of the top of the staff made it easier to stir shit. It was like an egg beater. Finally, the fight ended. Because they were already familiar with the rhythm, both sides could scold each other without blushing. Yin Sun coughed lightly, Little E, I know that no matter what, he won't be back for hundreds of years. He can't stay idle. He's been cooped up in the dome for hundreds of years. Won't he take this opportunity to go out and enjoy himself? And he won't be back. In a few days, I'll make some arrangements and return to the fifth ring. Do you have any words for me? I'm really relieved to leave the interior sky to you two senior martial brothers. In fact, you two are not much worse than your elders. Senior martial brother Qing Xian's intestines are not filthy, but they're bad. I don't know the length of senior martial brother Xiu's tongue, but it's barbed. Both of them said in unison, Junior martial sister, how can you say that? They were indeed very angry, but they were also very relaxed. According to their experience, half-immortal Lu had thrived in this kind of beating all his life. There were many people who beat him, but none of them had a good ending. Take the military monks group for example. Although they could not compete with Lu Xiaoyi's group in the interior sky, they were still a significant force. But now, after the heart plate incident, most of the neutral interior half-immortals stood on the side of Lu Xiaoyi's group, including a few righteous Buddhist disciples. It was not only the interior sky. In the hearts of the people of the exterior sky, the military monk, as the best opponent, had also successfully helped Lu Xiaoyi win the respect of the cultivators of the exterior sky. This seemingly impossible gathering of power was completed in such an inexplicable manner. Fortune and misfortune were interdependent. There was really no fixed number. No one was a fool. The vision of a half-immortal allowed them to see the ins and outs of the incident very clearly. First, there was Duan Li's personal experience, and then there was the shocking change in the Jade Book at the end. The role of Buddhism in this was self-evident. This was also the reason why the military monk, hands-free, and the others were unwilling to come back. Once the general trend was lost, it would be difficult to get back the people's hearts again. The higher one's cultivation, the more one was unwilling to be controlled by others. But if there must be such a person, of course, they must choose a person who was responsible, trustworthy, strong, and not fussy about personal grievances. In this regard, Lu Xiaoyi was completely superior to the military monk. The mission of the heavenly eyes was successfully completed. The people of the exterior sky held Chief Lu in high esteem, except for one person's whereabouts. This was actually the least important to Lu Xiaoyi, because in the eyes of his companions of the fifth ring, his whereabouts were basically unknown. When the weather was hot, maggots multiplied, and mosquitoes and flies wreaked havoc, it was the time for a troublemaker to appear. In the past 2,000 years, there had never been an exception. A figure swayed out from the exterior sky. The old Taoist who heard this smiled and tapped his fingers. Well, the fifth ring was controlled, and the eastern sky seemed to follow his lead. The interior sky was controlled. The exterior sky basically couldn't escape. Yes, there were also women. As the chief of the women's friends, this guy was really wild. Every time he started from unexpected places, the effect was great. How many places were there? How many forces were there? When this little guy started to stir up the wind and rain, Wen Ji couldn't help but feel a little excited. This was much more interesting than Li Wuya's time. Of course, the more people there were, the better. A person's greatness was suitable to be written in a biography. But it was destined to be a tragedy because it was a one-man show. Only the greatness of an era would make everyone have the impulse to participate in it. Li Wuya was good at everything, but he was a bit of a hipster. He stirred shit just to pretend. Lu Xiaoyi was not as good as him. He really treated stirring shit as a career. The organization was tight, the division of labor was clear, the goal was firm, and the plan was carried out layer by layer. Chapter 1948. What was this place? The unfamiliar surroundings made him very confused. This was not the void of the universe, but within a certain world. The scenery was ordinary, and the people were ordinary. The scenery was right in front of him. If he took a step forward, he would be integrated into it. But the choice was up to him. He could also retreat. He was very clear that if he kept retreating, he could leave this ordinary world and return to the void of the universe he was familiar with. Then, he could go home through the exterior realm. He was somewhat hesitant because some problems were troubling him. He had no past. The self that he had painstakingly built up was completely destroyed by the full power of the exterior realm immortal monarch. Thus, he became the person he was now, a person without a past. This was his punishment for deliberately erasing the name list. At that time, the Jade Book had said, "Since you like to forget the past, then I will help you." It had said so, and it had done so. Not just a certain part of the past, but all of the past. Was there such a method in this world that could completely erase someone's memory? Of course there was. For example, the Foundation establishment Jin Dan could easily erase a mortal's memory. Of course, it was more difficult to selectively erase it. What was important was the ability to use one's mind. The Yuanying Lord could easily erase the memory of the Foundation establishment Jin Dan. Similarly, it didn't seem too difficult for a half-immortal to erase the memory of Yuanying. Therefore, it wasn't impossible for a senior immortal to completely erase the memory of a demon who hadn't completely become a half-immortal. There was a problem to pay attention to here: erasing the memory. It wasn't erasing the past. The past could never be erased because it actually existed. You could deny it and forget it, but you couldn't make it cease to exist. It was just that he couldn't recall it, and it was sealed in the depths of his memory. The difference was that the sealing method was different. Some were very difficult to unseal, and the cultivator would never be able to find his past in his lifetime. Some could be done, but it also depended on one's luck and hard work. But no matter what, this process was necessary. In this universe where every second mattered, it was an extra burden for Lu Xiaoyi. But the fact was, there was no use regretting it. Since he wanted to succeed in the exterior realm, this was a risk he had to take. He had a vague feeling about the situation in front of him. Was it a place he had heard of before? But he wasn't sure. It seemed to have something to do with his lost past. But that didn't seem to be the case. It was always hard to guess the thoughts of immortals. However, there was one thing that he was very clear about. The punishment from the exterior immortal monarch seemed to be more of a test than a malicious intent. His intuition was that everything would be explained once he stepped into this ordinary world. He might succeed, but he might also fail on the verge of success. If he gave up and returned to the familiar environment of the universe, then he would still be himself, still the all-powerful Lu Xing of the universe. He could still find his past through some method, which was the safest way. He sighed. He couldn't choose safety now. Because his time was running out. 2 paths, one unknown, the other familiar. It was a classic multiple-choice question, a classic gain and loss. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. With the unknown, there would be expectations and changes. He would not go back to being the sect leader obediently. He stepped forward and walked into the ordinary world that seemed to be shrouded in fog. The ordinary world didn't seem ordinary. He was the one who was beginning to become ordinary. His abilities were deteriorating rapidly. He fell from half-immortal to monarch, and continued to fall. When he was still hesitating about which path to take, his realm had already fallen to Jin Dan, and continued to fall. Not every path could be taken. Many paths seemed feasible, but he couldn't take them. There was only one path that seemed to be barely passable. He realized that he had become a teenager, leaning against the window and studying hard. Looking out of the window, it was so familiar and intimate. Familiar scenes, familiar people. The servants hurried past, the maidservants carried food boxes into the courtyard, and the butler followed behind calmly and steadily. His gaze inadvertently swept over the maidservant's buttocks. He didn't really become a teenager. It was as if he was a soul floating 3 feet above the teenager's head. He could feel that as long as he truly merged with his body, he could find his past. But he couldn't enter. This was Lu Province. The time period was before his time travel. He was a real young master of Lu Province, not a fake like him. He more or less understood the meaning of coming to this place. This was deliberately done by an exterior immortal monarch. In other words, this was a very special immortal art, a immortal art that could erase a cultivator's memories. It wasn't a barbaric erasure. No matter how barbaric it was, it couldn't erase time, it couldn't erase those things that truly existed. The special thing about this immortal art was that while erasing your past memories, it also created a scene for you to find them again. It was very in line with the true essence of the immortal art. It achieved a perfect balance between taking and giving. If you found your past in this process, then congratulations, you'd successfully established your past self, which was the most difficult of the past, present, and future. If you couldn't find your past in the end, you couldn't merge with your soul of countless lifetimes, then congratulations, you'd forever lose your past and become a half-immortal with no past and no future. It sounded very troublesome. But in fact, it was the method that didn't involve karma, because you'd lose your past because of yourself. There was a certain logic behind taking off your pants and farting. This involved a very profound question of cultivation philosophy. Were the current you and the past you the same? Philosophy was always very brain-burning. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't figure it out for a while. But he was very clear about one thing. At the very least, the current him wasn't the real young master of Lu Province. Because his consciousness could only float 3 feet above his former self, he couldn't get any closer. The current him wasn't him yet. This was what he needed to work hard for next, to strive to become the past him. This was a bit of a mouthful, because even if it was a person's life, at different stages, they were actually different versions of themselves. Infant, teenager, youth, adult, middle-aged, old. But there must be something in common among them, and it was this common thing that supported him through reincarnation after reincarnation. He had a deeper and more fundamental understanding of samsara, although this kind of understanding was useless to him now. Then, what do the current me and the past me have in common? He could only search and find, slowly through the long river of time, through observing every little thing in his life, to find a trace of something hidden in the deepest part of his soul. He couldn't be anxious, because there was no use in being anxious, because he was now a weak spiritual body that didn't have the strength to truss a chicken. He stopped above his former self's head, and couldn't float away alone, nor could he get any closer. God is watching from above, so it was referring to himself. Lu Xiaoyi understood. Chapter 1949. Lu Xiaoyi had a lot of experience in wandering. He had been wandering since he was just a wisp of energy in the universe. Later, he continued to wander after he transmigrated into a human being. Now that he had become his own god, he was still wandering. But this time, he had no choice but to wander. It was passive. He could not go wherever he wanted to go. It was like an emperor's hat, invisibly worn on his former self's head. It allowed him to study, play, eat, sleep, and argue with his mother, just like now, he was enjoying his supper. This was the inevitable arrangement of a rich family for the children who studied hard. Young people always got hungry faster. Ping'an stood beside him with a serious face, watching him eat. His posture and expression were serious. His eyes swept over the servant girl's swaying buttocks again. Of course, his body did not notice these, but as his own god, he saw them clearly. Why didn't he notice this indecent thing before? He was a wretched, greasy middle-aged man of his age who had disguised himself very successfully. Having a wife and children and looking at other women's buttocks were two different things. Buttocks were always better than other people's. After the servant girl went out, he leaned over to Lu Xiaoyi's ear sneakily. "Young master, eat quickly. There's a good opportunity today." Obviously, this body understood what he meant. He finished the chicken soup in a few mouthfuls and stood up while wiping his mouth. The two of them sneaked out of the small courtyard one after the other. It was very abnormal because they were sneaking around the wall. Lu Xiaoyi, as the god of this body, had to move forward with them and maintain a first-person perspective. He was surprised. Ever since he transmigrated into this body at the age of 18, he did not feel that he had such a close relationship with this butler. The two of them left his small courtyard and walked along the wall. As the butler, he was very familiar with the routes in the mansion, the guards, the night watchmen, and the rest of the servants. He knew where people were and when people were. So, he perfectly avoided the eyes and ears of all the servants along the way. God Lu was getting more and more confused. Could it be that before he transmigrated, this body had already begun to cultivate without anyone knowing? But after he ascended the ghost realm, everything was washed away. That shouldn't be the case. Why didn't Ping'an say anything? The two of them took many twists and turns. In fact, they didn't leave the manor. They only came to a low-tiled house. It was obvious that this was the place where the servants stayed and rested. There was a lantern at the front of the room, but it was dark at the back, and there was a fence. Ping'an was very familiar with the place. He touched a spot on the seemingly sturdy fence and pushed it open. He leaned sideways and squeezed in while whispering, "Be gentle. Don't be like last time, where I had to pretend to be a dog and bark to fool them. Now that there's no dog in the residence, what else can I pretend to be?" The body curled its lips. "Aren't there still cats? If it doesn't work, there's still the weasel." Although he said that, he was still very careful. Obviously, he didn't want to be discovered by others. There were sundries in the fence, such as shabby tables, chairs, ladders, and all kinds of living utensils. If they were careless, they would make a noise. It was very challenging for two ordinary people. However, the two of them were obviously very experienced. They didn't make any noise all the way. It was obvious that they were used to it. Godlu was even more confused. Obviously, they were not going to cultivate. It was more like they were going to explore a secret. The question was, how could they explore a secret so skillfully? Soon, they bypassed the messy pile of sundries. Pinyin began to show off his achievements. "Young master," they reported that they needed some curtains. I deliberately made it difficult for them. I didn't give them good ones. I gave them some curtains with a few holes so that they could see more clearly. The body didn't say anything. Instead, he patted Pinyin's shoulder to show his encouragement. Pinyin enjoyed the pat very much and lowered his voice. "After supper, there's nothing to do. Now the weather is cool, so they don't take a bath often. I know that young master is impatient." In the afternoon, I deliberately arranged them to clean some rooms that haven't been used for a long time. Those who are born smelly and sweaty will definitely take a bath at night. Now, Lu Xinming completely understood. It turned out that the problem of watching his senior sister taking a bath was not brought by the thoughts of his previous world. That's right. In the era of incomparably developed information, what couldn't they see? Why did it take so much effort? Finally, they came to the back window of the bathroom. The gauze curtain was tattered. It was really difficult for Pinyin to find such a tattered thing. It was estimated that this guy tore it secretly by himself. The body leaned against the window and watched enthusiastically. Pinyin was on tenterhooks. Godlu's position was more than 3 feet higher than the body's eyes. It happened that there were no holes, so he couldn't see anything. Of course, he was not interested in this. After getting used to seeing round and smooth immoral farts, who would be interested in looking at moral farts full of fat? It was just a small episode, but many interesting things could be seen from it. For example, in Lu Province, because there was no male master like his father, the young master's education in certain aspects was very lacking. If it was in a normal big house, the children of a big family would have been brought to the brothel by their elders to drink and have fun after reaching adulthood. Under the influence of actual combat, how could they have such a bad habit? After half an hour, the two of them returned to the same way they came. It was not until they entered their own courtyard that Pinyin heaved a sigh of relief. Finally, there was no mistake. If the old madam knew about this, nothing would happen to the young master, but he would be doomed. He was destined to be kicked out of the house. In Pu City, who would dare to use him? Young master, listen to my advice. There are countless brothel houses in Pu City. Which young master hasn't played there before? Who would laugh at you? Even if you don't want people to know, there are many hidden places that take care of the guest's privacy. There's no problem. The money is enough. The income you've earned during the holidays and the daily income over the years adds up to a lot. Young master, you don't have any other places to spend money. Even if you don't do it, why don't you find dancers Xia to dance? Raiment dance, thin gown dance, primitive dance, why do you have to do these in the house? It makes people nervous. I'm afraid that something will happen and it will be seen by others and reported to the two madams. The body was very disdainful and even tugged at his school bag. There are things to do and things not to do. Pinyin shook his head when he heard this. There are things to do and things not to do. The things you do are not as good as the things you don't do. It couldn't be helped. Who asked the young master to have such a strange temper? How was a treacherous official cultivated? That was how it was cultivated. Chapter 1950. P.S. Looking for guaranteed monthly votes. The first thing Lu Deity did when he came to this ordinary world was to give him a huge shock. This made him immediately realize that there was a fatal flaw in his past self-establishment. If it wasn't for that, he wouldn't be the young master of Lu Province. It was because he didn't have a comprehensive understanding of his past. He thought that he was the young master of Lu Province, but this wasn't true, or rather, it wasn't completely true. Zhang San could say that he was Zhang San, and Li Si could say that he was Li Si, but Lu Xiaoyi couldn't say that, because he had indeed changed. He could be made up of 3 people's consciousness, or 2. The young master of Lu province, his soul in his previous life, could have an unclear relationship with the Crow ancestor? Or could the last 2 be the same thing? He hadn't awakened the memories of his previous life. This could only mean 2 things. Either he was the young master of Lu province, and he had never cultivated in his previous life, or he had never cultivated to the level of yuanying. Or he hadn't reached that level yet. He was now a half-immortal, and if he hadn't reached that level yet, then no one other than the Crow ancestor could meet this condition. This was the reason why he wanted to purify himself. However, this process didn't go smoothly. Before this, he thought that he had already established his past self, but now it seemed that there were flaws hidden so deeply that even he didn't realize it. It wasn't until his past was erased by the immortal that he had the chance to truly face his past, a real young master of Lu province. At the very least, he understood one thing. On him, there seemed to be more of the shadow of the young master of the Lu family. It was in the details that he rarely paid attention to. For example, where did the habit of peeping at people bathing come from? He was the young master of Lu province. This was a very ridiculous process, and he wanted to desperately prove that he was himself. What happened next made him feel even more incredulous. This body had read books for a day and experienced such stimulation at night. After the excitement, he was tired and quickly fell into a deep sleep. Then, Lu Deity felt that his spiritual energy state had fallen into a sluggish state in a very short time, as if it had been frozen. He couldn't even think. He was a little surprised. Was he going to be sent back just like that? Wasn't it too short? He hadn't done anything yet, and nothing had changed. Soon, he couldn't even support this last bit of complaining. As his body fell into a deep sleep, his spiritual soul also fell into a deep sleep. His last thought was that the spiritual energy supply of this adventure was closely related to the main body. Things didn't reach the worst point. When the body woke up the next morning, God Lu also woke up. What followed was a series of daily routines. However, in this series of daily routines, he discovered an extremely shocking abnormality. Because this body was greeting his mother, he suddenly realized that today was not the second day, but the day before yesterday. In other words, the long river of time here wasn't flowing with the current, but flowing against the current. Every time he fell into a deep sleep with this body, when he woke up the next day, he didn't grow up by 1 day, but became younger by 1 day. What was the mechanism of such a celestial art? Even though he was a half-immortal, he had no clue. Since he was already here, he couldn't go back now. He could only feel his past self in this kind of time reversal, which he wasn't completely familiar with now. He found the commonalities and commonalities. When he found more and more of these things, he was getting closer and closer to completely integrating with this body. The external manifestation was that he had changed from 3 feet above his head to 2.5 feet above his head. He was half a foot closer to the main body. Finally, he saw hope. He just needed to hold on. But in this life, he really couldn't hold on anymore. Because he was getting younger and younger, from a young man to a young boy, then to a child, and now to a baby. The time he slept was getting longer and longer, so long that Lu Deity could only stay awake for 6 to 6 hours a day. His spiritual energy form sank to 2.5 feet before it stopped sinking, because it was impossible to find common ground with a baby. Was it a bed of pee? This kind of change was very novel. He had an intuition about what he would encounter next. Then, he would just sleep and wait in his sleep. Time? He was too lazy to calculate it. Because it was meaningless. Was this an instantaneous celestial art? Or was it synchronized with the outside world? It seemed impossible to synchronize, because the time outside was flowing with the current, but here he was flowing against the current, and it wasn't completely flowing against the current. It was flowing with the current during the day, and suddenly taking a big step back at night. It was as if he was doing a reverse Yanko dance. At the moment when he jumped back to the mother's womb, he felt that he had regained consciousness. Only in the mother's womb did he, the 3-foot god, begin to gradually integrate with his body, and the degree of integration was inversely proportional to the growth of the fetus. When his body became the embryo at the beginning of conception, the degree of integration reached perfection. But this kind of integration had no practical significance. Now, he was just a big cell, and even his hands and feet hadn't grown out. In this kind of situation, he still had things to explore, such as the mystery in the womb. The mystery in the womb was the biggest secret in the process of human formation. It was a mystery in the mystery of reincarnation, karma, creation, fate, good fortune, yin and yang, impermanence, and other innate great daos. Since the history of cultivation, no one had ever been able to explain this mystery clearly. Where did the first consciousness come from? In which aspect was the influence of the past reflected? Could it determine a person's personality when they were in the womb? Everything in this body, was it given more by reincarnation? Or was it given more by the parents? There were too many mysteries, but unfortunately, he didn't exist as an embryo for long. There was only one thing he was sure of, and that was the most selfless support given to him by the mother in this process. If he didn't experience all of this, he would never fully understand this point. Nutrition was always given to him first. The mother was in front of the virus that harmed him. Because he was a child, and she was the mother. Continue to retreat. Backtrack in the darkness. Then, suddenly, light came, as if all the shackles had been removed. He saw the sky again, and saw the world again. A strange world, a strange crowd of crying people, men and women, the old and the young. The mourning hall outside had already been set up, and there was also a heavy coffin made of Nanma wood. Yes, this was right. Today was the last day of his reincarnation, but tomorrow was the second to last day before his death. It was a mouthful, but he had already adapted to this kind of time reversal. The consciousness of a dying person was also vague. His consciousness was sometimes clear, and sometimes drowsy. Therefore, even a god like him was drowsy, and it was very difficult to get an accurate integration of information. Until the second day. Chapter 1951. P.S. Looking for guaranteed monthly votes. On the second day, which was the day he was further away from death, the cries were not as deafening as before. It was just sobbing. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that his body was in a bad state. There was no way to save him. The coffin was still there, but the mourning hall was still being decorated. It was summer now, so there was no freezer. On the third day, no one was crying, but a few of his children were arguing nervously beside him. They were arguing about how to divide the house, how to divide the land, how to divide the gold and silver, and so on. They were like a swarm of flies, buzzing around. On the 10th day, he was still lying on the bed. Beside him were his most trusted aides. He was secretly making arrangements for matters after his death. The illegitimate children outside the city were having a hard time, so they had to be compensated. Which son was not filial enough, so they had to be given less of the family property, and so on. For a month, the newly married and most favored concubine was touching him. He wanted to, but he was powerless. A year later, he was still a bridegroom, just a little older. But in this world, as long as you had power and influence, it was nothing new for the old and young to be matched. It could also be used as a way to ward off bad luck. 10 years later, he was invited to a gathering with his old friends, sighing endlessly. 30 years later, he was in the prime of his life, high-spirited, and his family had just been established. 50 years, 70 years. He began to walk the same path again. The 2.5 feet of deity was now 2 feet and 2 inches, but it was no longer decreasing, because he had entered the stage of being a child again. This was the beginning of another reincarnation. This kind of life was enough for him to carefully experience. Compared with himself, he found similarities. Even if he found fewer and fewer things after reincarnation, at least he had a direction. The mystery of the fetus was the most important thing to him. He had an intuition that if he wanted to completely integrate into it, he had to solve it at this stage. As for reducing the 3 feet of deity to 0 feet, it was almost impossible. Just the experience of 2 reincarnations made him understand that this was just a math game. The further he went, the closer he could only be to 0 distance, but it was impossible for him to really reach it. 0 distance meant that it would perfectly overlap with Lu Xiaoyi's original body. Even if he was not a transmigrator, he might not be able to do this. He was completely isolated from the cultivation world of the universe. He couldn't even try to ask or do anything. He was like a strange circle that floated above the head of the young master reincarnated from Lu province. When they slept, he would also sleep with them. When they made babies, he would grumble in boredom. He couldn't leave. He couldn't even commit suicide. No one could see him, not even cultivators. His entire life was bound to this body. Ren Liunian retreated and saw the youth that came rushing at him. The only good news was that he finally realized that the passage of time here had nothing to do with the environment of the universe outside. In other words, if he could escape one day, perhaps not much time had passed in the outside world. I hope it won't take too long. Lu Xiaoyi went back one life after another. In each life, he discovered his commonality. In each life, he explored the secrets of reincarnation. This went on for life after life. After all, he was a half-immortal soul. After dozens of reincarnations, he finally compressed the 3-foot god to a foot. However, it was difficult for him to compress even an inch. This was a simple mathematical problem. The answer was infinitely close, but it would always be close. His real progress was not in this, but in the mystery of the fetus. After dozens of reincarnations, he had a substantial understanding of the secrets of reincarnation. It could be said that he no longer needed reincarnation fragments on the path of reincarnation. His progress on the path of reincarnation gave him the possibility of completely merging with the fetus in the womb. Furthermore, he would not slowly separate from the fetus as it grew. He was very careful with this method, because one careless mistake could turn him into an idiot. The key was the moment when the fetus disappeared. If the operation was successful, he would appear in the body of his previous life, and not float above his head like a halo. However, he had always been hesitant about whether he should do this. This was because a natural fusion was different from a fusion using a cultivation method. The former was following the will of heaven, while the latter was changing one's life. A passive fusion was called transmigration, while an active fusion was called seizing. The difference was very subtle. Even if he was seizing himself, could he do it? Or not? If he really merged, seized, and placed his consciousness above the consciousness of the main body, what would happen? It seemed that there would be no change. This was because he was driving backward in time. After seizing once, he would have to seize a second time. If he seized today, it might affect tomorrow, but it would not affect yesterday. He would seize as many times as he lived. What he did was meaningless to his own life, because it was equivalent to not doing anything. When he woke up after sleeping, he would still be yesterday without the fusion. In theory, this kind of fusion would last for a lifetime. When he finally returned to the womb, the two would become one. This was only in theory, and it was his deduction. Lu Xiaoyi continued to deduce, trying to be more confident in the technical level. This was because he might only have this one chance, and there was no room for error. After going through more than 10 reincarnations, he had finally achieved perfection in terms of technique. Ever since he started cultivating, the application of the mind had always been his strength. This was also the reason why he was still so confident even after dawdling here for so long. He had a plan, and he had the means. What he lacked now was determination. He was not an indecisive person, but now he was doubting whether his method of fusion, which he had a high chance of succeeding in, was ethically valid. There were many paradoxes. Could the reincarnated people be replaced in different reincarnations? Were the souls of the reincarnated people completely the same? If the answer was yes, what positive significance would a reincarnated person have to the universe and the progress of mankind? Forever stuck in one's ways, forever not thinking of making progress, Ling Wang had once told him that in the universe, nothing was eternal. If he had to choose one, it would be that only change was eternal. Thinking about it carefully, the meaning was endless. If the answer was no, it meant that the 1-foot-long deity that he was now would never be able to land on the head of this body. This was because they could not replace each other, because in every life, there would be more or less parental factors that would affect it. Then what was the point of such a test? The most important core was whether he should seize the body or not. Whether he could pass this test or not. This was a question of morality. It was very illusory and philosophical, but at his level, once he made the wrong choice, he would be ruined for life. This was the reason why he was hesitating. Chapter 1952. P.S. Looking for guaranteed monthly votes. Lu Xiaoyi was wavering between his choices. One moment, he favored practical results, the next moment, he favored ethics and morality, even though it was strange for an existence like him to talk about morality. No matter how much he hesitated, he still had to make a decision. In the end, in the balance of his heart, he was more inclined to follow reason and morality. Of course, to him, it was not so high and mighty. It was just a kind of bottom-line thinking. There was a price to pay for insisting on the bottom line. The price was that the speed of his light circle's descent began to slow down to the point that it made people's hair stand on end. During this process, he began to learn how to control it appropriately. For example, he no longer needed to wait day by day. Instead, he could shorten the time he needed to comprehend it every few days, or even every 10 days. It was like the fast rewind button of a video recorder. This helped him to quickly pass through those useless periods, such as the infancy stage. He had encountered a good opportunity to forcefully fuse. After so many reincarnations and reverse reincarnations, Lu Xiaoyi had a deep understanding of reincarnation and the mystery of being in the womb. At the same time, he also discovered many regularities, such as the time interval between reincarnations. Not everyone would be able to enter the next life immediately after death. There was a problem of waiting in line. The length of waiting time was determined by the heavenly axiom's judgment of good and evil in the previous life. This was also the reason why some people in the moral world described so-and-so as a good person for several lifetimes. Because of the accumulation of good deeds, the reincarnation was particularly fast. However, few people had heard of a bad person for 9 lifetimes. This was because their reincarnation was always intermittent. The heavenly axiom deliberately made souls like them wait in line. Lu Xiaoyi had explored this experience. Until now, he could basically deduce whether this body had done more good deeds or more evil deeds in the previous life. After dozens of lifetimes, he found that although his body was not very good, it was still a good person overall. Therefore, the waiting time in line was very short. This was a reward from the heavenly axiom. However, in his current situation, it was disadvantageous for him to forcefully fuse. In order to achieve a perfect fusion process, it was better to wait for a longer time. For him, who had grasped similar regularities, this might be a rare opportunity for him. Should he do it or not? His consciousness was once again immersed in the fetus. At this moment, his senses were particularly sensitive. He could feel that he was very likely an evil person in his previous life. He could feel that this kind of possession could reduce the influence of morality to the minimum. He could feel that all the conditions for possession had been met. He was afraid that he would not be able to wait for a more suitable opportunity than this one. He could also feel that it was difficult for his spiritual circle to sink any further. Everything was ready except for the east wind. The east wind was his determination. When the conditions are right, success will follow naturally. This should be the cultivation philosophy of a cultivator. Follow the will of the heavens and follow one's heart. He went through all of this in his consciousness again and smiled. He stopped thinking and didn't want to tire himself out. Instead, he chose to sleep with the embryos. This was a crucial choice. After experiencing dozens of reincarnations, he gave up on the things that he had understood for such a long time. He gave himself to the cultivation of doing nothing and let nature take its course. This was a gamble. He was betting on bidding farewell to mediocrity and having a brighter future. After a long wait, when he appeared in his reincarnation again, he was besieged by a group of chivalrous people. As the continent's most notorious bandit, murderer, and sex fiend, his hands were stained with blood. He had escaped from the encirclement of righteous people countless times. But this time, he couldn't escape anymore. When numerous weapons pierced his body, what made the chivalrous people shudder was that this evil person's face had a smile that came from his heart. A carefree smile. A smile as if a burden had been lifted. A smile full of hope. Because the spiritual circle above his head was no longer there. It didn't disappear. Instead, it was in the sea of consciousness of this body, merging with the body and becoming one. He made the right bet. The spiritual circle didn't need to be in direct contact with the human body. The factors to consider were actually other factors. A person, even if they were at different ages and stages in their life, would not be completely the same person. How could there be a difference between reincarnations? Change was the true essence of the universe, and that included humans. His body was already dead. This time, because his spirit and body had completely merged, the reincarnation cycle was interrupted. He didn't continue his reincarnation journey. He couldn't do it, and there was no need to. He withdrew from the initial state when he entered this ordinary world. He felt that his abilities had recovered. Looking in from here, all the paths of the ordinary world were open to him. That was the entrance to his countless pasts. Only one path was closed. He could guess what was behind this path. That must be the magnificent life of a swordsman. He gave up. From now on, it had nothing to do with him. Because he had chosen to be the truly ordinary young master of Lu Province. If one path was opened, another would naturally be closed. It was impossible to eat more than one. Why was it one path and not two? He had two special pasts. There was only one answer. Those two pasts were very likely the same thing. He wasn't necessarily a transmigrator. The masters of those two pasts were, but he wasn't. He was a native. This was the truth of the matter. From now on, when other cultivators looked at his future, they would no longer be able to see the strange phenomenon that had once appeared. That past life's past, that peerless evil sword, was destined to become history. And he had forever lost the opportunity to understand this past. He didn't regret it. Compared to listening to other people's stories, he wanted to have his own story. He didn't leave. Instead, he stood here for a long time, gazing at this past that had already been closed to him. This past had given him too much help at the beginning of his cultivation. It could be said that most of his early important opportunities had come from here. Without this past, he didn't know if he could still reach his current height. It even involved those existences that silently supported him from behind. Elder Gyo, Big Bird, Fat Otaku, Black Dragon, Wild Boar, Bayan, and so on. Without this past, he was destined to have no fate with these existences. This was a fact. He wasn't someone who would turn hostile after receiving favors from others. On the contrary, he especially valued these things. He laughed softly and murmured, "Many thanks for your company and help. Please forgive me for my youth and ignorance. But you must know, Little Eagle will eventually grow up. Forever staying under a powerful wing, it's destined that he won't be able to spread his wings and soar high, conquering the clouds and defying the wind. So he has to eat the eggshell and face everything alone. I won't say thanks because I still have to wipe your ass. This is the most difficult task in this world. Consider my repayment to you." Chapter 1953. Lu Xiaoyi had finally solved the problem of his past. Li Wuya, the time traveler, liked to stir shit and wanted to change the world. However, this was not the exclusive right of the time traveler. The Aborigines also had this right. The time traveler had failed, and now it was up to the Aborigines. In other words, the time traveler had started, and now it was time for him to continue. Towards the Crow ancestor, he had always been rude. He was not an ingrate, but a soul who wanted to get rid of the influence of others and be more independent. Just like a son to his father, respect was one thing, disobedience was another. There was no conflict. He just wanted to prove himself. This was the common problem of every promising child, and he was no exception. After pouring out his heart, he finally relaxed. This was a necessary attitude for the path he was going to take in the future. Since the burden was gone, he no longer had any worries. He quickly retreated and appeared in the void of the universe, a place he was very familiar with. When he looked back, his surroundings were empty. Where was the ordinary world and the countless roads? There was only a void, and a void beast was peeking its head out and running away in panic. Odd Righteous Pure Land. This was the Odd Righteous Pure Land. It did not exist in the void, but in the heart of every cultivator. It was the only way for immortals to climb up. However, the universe was in chaos, and even a small half-immortal like him had the opportunity to experience the wonders of the Odd Righteous Pure Land. He could pass the test of the Odd Righteous Pure Land because he understood that a person was always changing, just like how you could never step into the same river. Therefore, it did not matter how many feet Lucian was. It was just a matter of how much he changed. As long as he existed, it meant that he had a connection with his past, and there was something in common. The key was the process of him finding his past. He did not force, did not take over, and respected every life, even if it was his reincarnation. In such a private situation, he could still be serious and not bully others. What would happen if it was someone else? This was the test of the Odd Righteous Pure Land for him. This was definitely not the only way. Different people had different ways of testing. Not everyone had such a complicated experience in the past. The purpose of the Pure Land of Oddity was to catch the most critical flaw in each cultivator's state of mind and create a scene to test the cultivator's quality, to see if the cultivator was qualified to become an eternal immortal. Therefore, Qing Xian did not know where the so-called Qijing Pure Land was. It was just because he had never been there before. Just like how he had been there now, he would not tell anyone about it. The punishment for revealing heaven's secrets was very severe. Even if he told his friends, would it be a good thing? That might not be the case. On the contrary, he might be worried about personal gains and losses. The only thing he was curious about was the purpose of this exterior immortal. Such a complicated immortal technique couldn't be used so casually, right? Was this really a punishment? After cultivating for more than 2,000 years, he roughly understood some of the so-called immortals' basic principles. There was no absolute right, wrong, good, or bad. I'll give you a chance. If you pass, then it's fate. If you don't pass, then you deserve it because you're not qualified. He should be grateful for this opportunity. Not the negative consequences that could be caused by the opportunity. If it were someone else, would they use such an immortal technique to waste time and energy? Therefore, it should be a kind of test with goodwill as the starting point. However, this kind of test was more cruel. There was a high probability that he would fail. He would not think that this was a malicious killing plot. If he thought about it this way, the path would become narrower and narrower. He looked at the time. As he expected, it was only a few moments. This time was basically wasted on reminiscing in the ordinary world. The real reincarnation time was only a moment. He was in a void that was very unfamiliar to him. He could not even find the familiar location of the main star. For a master of stars like him, who liked to travel around, if he still felt unfamiliar, this place should not be in the eastern heaven. He had a way to go back, but he had his own concerns. If he used the interior heaven as a transit, he would have to enter the interior heaven and accept the restrictions of entering and exiting. Using the exterior heaven was very attractive, but the problem was that the exterior immortal monarch was now paying attention to him. It might not matter if others used the exterior heaven as a transit, but it was too eye-catching for him. The most important thing was that he did not want to go back to the boring life of a sect leader so soon. Since he had come out, since he had so many reasons. He looked at the stars aimlessly all the way. He also needed some time to digest the changes that this experience had brought to him. He liked to float in the void and think about problems. His mind was much more sensitive than in the bounded domain. This was a habit that had been cultivated for more than 2,000 years and had been solidified. Looking at himself, the past was very clear and there was no suspense left. This was also what he wanted. The future of the universe would change very quickly, so he needed a solid foundation. His ego was complete, and he knew very well that his superego was still completing the final construction, so it would not take much time. In this way, he had already completed the foundation of immortal ascension. It was enough for him to deal with the next upper-level sun spirit, or to take the second step. In his self-reflection, a very strange thing appeared in his perception. He immediately understood what it was. Faith. After having an independent faith for nearly 1,000 years, he had a new faith, respect. Faith had always been insignificant in the process of his cultivation. Sometimes, he would even forget that he had such a thing. However, faith had always subtly influenced his way of doing things. For example, independence. It was this deep-rooted sense of independence that made him resolutely choose to sever his ties with the two special pasts. Even if he had to pay the price, he wanted to become an absolute and independent self. He did not want to live in the shadow of others, even if the shadow might be very great. The same went for respect. It had happened unknowingly and arrived. In fact, when he thought about it carefully, it was a matter of course and a matter of course. In the exterior realm, he was willing to take a strange risk and respect others. He would rather offend the immortals for the people on the list. In the odd righteous Pure Land, he respected himself. He would rather lose the past forever than to scheme for some seemingly insignificant reincarnation. Respecting others and respecting oneself was the respect of faith. It sounded simple, but it was very difficult to do it. He had two faiths. Lu Xiaoyi sighed with emotion. In fact, ever since he had obtained conviction, he had rarely used it in battle. Conviction had the miraculous ability to reduce defense by 10%, and now that he had two, he could reduce defense by 20%. This would play a decisive role in a battle between experts. The reason why he did not use it often was that the swordsman's fixed thinking was always afraid that he would become dependent on it. But now that he thought about it, he had worked hard to get it. It was not like he had stolen it or picked it up. Why should he be so stupid? With the improvement of the realm, it was not only knowledge that was opened, but also the mind. Chapter 1954. A strange phenomenon was that the things he was cultivating now had less and less to do with the sword. But because of this, his sword was becoming sharper and sharper. This was the true philosophy of cultivation. Sword Tao was not something to be taken out of alone. It was still within the entire Taoist system. When you felt that your swordsmanship had hit the ceiling and could not improve, don't be discouraged and practice something else. Tao state of mind, past, present, future, and countless other aspects. While he was strengthening himself, he was also strengthening the foundation of his swordsmanship. Tao was always interlinked. He now deeply understood this point. He began to contact the heavenly eyes. He had to check on the completion of this mission and his friends in the interior realm. If he was fine, they would certainly be fine. But he also wanted to know what changes there would be in the exterior realm after this. The heavenly eyes quickly replied. It was concise and comprehensive, with two main points. First, the heavenly eyes recognized the completion of the mission. In view of his disrespect to the immortals, the problem could have been solved through the heavenly eyes' immortal monarch. But in the end, he had to play the hero, which was suspected of playing to the gallery and caused a commotion in the exterior realm. So his merits offset his faults, and there was no reward or punishment. However, there was one condition, which was to keep his status as the enforcer of heaven's eyes. On the surface, it was to let the interior experts continue to pursue the evildoers who had escaped from the exterior. But in fact, it was also a kind of recognition and reward in disguise. It was just that he couldn't say it out loud, so as to avoid the immortal court forces behind heaven's eyes and exterior experts from causing trouble. This status had many uses. It was not completely an empty position. Pursuing the exterior realm monsters was a long process. If one day was not enough, he would be the enforcer for one day. Such measures made Lu Xiaoyi wonder which immortal monarch was behind the heavenly eye's actions. It should be someone who had no prejudice against him, right? Secondly, when the exterior realm was really shaken, it was not the half-immortals who were shaken, but the exterior immortal monarch. It was said that there was a change of immortals. The heavenly eyes was a little vague about this and did not mention much. This was also the usual way of keeping things mysterious. The second point was very practical for him, because he could probably use some means to pass through the exterior realm. This allowed him to not lose his sense of direction. He began to consider whether or not he should take this opportunity to make a trip to the phoenix nest. After all, he was not the kind of person who would not admit his mistakes after putting on his pants. He had to at least meet Han Yin, even if it was as a friend. Just as he was thinking about his next destination, several cultivators surrounded him. They were all true monarchs. Moreover, he was just floating like a corpse. Others had thoughts, but he was just a corpse. It was normal for him to be blocked in this state. It was a little funny. How could he be targeted in such a strange place? Was it because he was too famous? Or was it because he was asking for a beating? Fellow Taoist, stop. You have entered our security zone. Please show us your background, orthodoxy, and roots. Lu Xiaoyi suddenly realized that he had stumbled into a fight. In the current cultivation world of the universe, chaos was everywhere and wars were frequent. It was just that there were very few fights as big as the one in Dongxiangshan. The battle of orthodoxy, the killing of the realm, the historical grievances, the gains and losses, everyone took this opportunity to settle it together. It was also a good way to avoid karma. He shook his head. He did not want to participate in such trivial matters. There was no end to it, and there was no right or wrong. Therefore, he said sincerely, I was thinking about something and went in the wrong direction. I'm sorry, I'll leave now. However, his politeness did not get the cultivators to bend the rules. This was normal. Some taboos could not be retracted just because he said that he went in the wrong direction. For example, Lu Xiaoyi entered the wrong senior sister's bathhouse. There were 4 people surrounding him. 2 of them were perfected lords and 2 of them were Yuanying. Among them, the perfected lord of the essence soul realm looked at him with an amused expression. As a perfected lord of the essence soul realm, he felt that this unfamiliar cultivator was very strange. He thought that this was a hint from his intuition, an external sign that Lu Xiaoyi had something to hide. However, he did not know that this was actually Lu Xiaoyi's natural concealment of his own realm after he had perfectly established his ego. His half-immortal aura had changed. This was a sign that he was about to reach the upper realm. However, a sign was a sign. It was possible that he would reach the upper realm tomorrow. It was also possible that he would reach the upper realm in 1,000 years. Please show us your orthodoxy and background. Before this, you are a prisoner of the Alliance. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Actually, after becoming a half-immortal and having a plan for his future, he rarely killed people. This was because what he wanted to do in the future required him to have more friends and not enemies. However, this cultivation world was always full of helplessness. He still wanted to make one last attempt to redeem himself. No one can force me to say anything when I'm under duress, even if it's about what I ate last time. This is the basic right of a cultivator who walks in the universe. I'm not a prisoner either, before you prove your strength. The path of cultivation is about mutual respect. I understand this principle. Do you understand? The nascent soul cultivator sneered. Putting aside his strength and talking about his authority, he didn't know how he managed to get to this point. All right, I'll force you now. Your orthodoxy, your background, and what you ate last time. With a wave of his hand, he activated his Tao realm and his spiritual pet spread its wings. The remaining 3 people also made their moves. He appeared to be very strong because this was the Alliance's territory. However, even so, he would still be very careful when dealing with a nascent soul cultivator who was like him. He would first use the Alliance's name to pressure him, then use words to confuse him. In fact, his purpose was just to occupy a position so that he could make the first move. He was very clear that words were useless. As long as he could take down this person, he would have the authority and the heavenly Tao. A flash of light streaked across the void. It seemed to be very far, but it also seemed to be very close. This wasn't contradictory, because that flash of light came faster than his mental reaction. He relied on his vision to see the flash of light from afar. He felt that the flash of light was very close because of his body's consciousness. When the sword aura exploded in his body, he knew that in the face of true power, all his little tricks were actually useless. Humans should learn to be respectful, especially cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi looked at the remaining 3 people indifferently. Humble, friendly. When you see a guest from afar, you should bring out your own wine and food. You should give good blessings and considerate help. You should even take out your more precious things. Yes, old witch, if that's the case, at least you won't say goodbye to this beautiful universe before the start of the Great Era. For example, I never ask people where they come from. Where are they going? Where is your home? What do you do? I only know how to say, hey, friend, you've been walking for a long time. Why don't you sit down and have a drink? If you have a good drink, what can't you say? Chapter 1955. The 3 cultivators from the so-called Alliance did not even dare to breathe loudly. 2 of them were bodhisattvas, while the other was a small Buddha. Their strength was far inferior to the leader's vital spirit. They did not expect that their senior brother would die here because they did not offer him good wine, food, and food. Most importantly, it was meaningless. They still did not know anything. Lu Xiaoyi found it strange that the 3 monks were so quiet out of fear. Even if there was a huge difference in strength, the first choice would be to scatter and escape. The universe was vast, and the chances of escape were high. There was no reason for them to be frightened by his pretentious words. The will of a cultivator was not so weak. He did not bother to investigate further. Then, if there is no wine, guests from afar can at least ask the host for directions, right? The 3 monks were even more bitter. They also realized their recklessness. This was a completely unnecessary conflict, but it could not be resolved. First of all, which sky is this? Under Lu Xiaoyi's abuse of power, Lu Xiaoyi quickly understood where he was. Western Heaven, the airspace near the Scarlet Star. Yes, it was the sword vein that Tu Muyun asked him to take care of when he was in the exterior sword vein. It wasn't that he had forgotten. He just felt that in terms of importance, there was no need to rush over there. It wouldn't be difficult for him to find a suitable time when he was more familiar with the exterior heavens in the future. He would definitely come to the Western Elephant Heavens. He liked to gather more things and solve them all at once. This was definitely not a coincidence. Was it intentional by the exterior immortal monarch? Did Tu Muyun have something to do with the exterior immortal monarch? Or was there another reason? He could not guess, but one thing was certain. This could be a convenient favor. It was also another way to express that the exterior immortal monarch had no ill intentions towards him. The Scarlet Star was a very unique medium-sized region. It was full of spiritual vigor. Due to historical reasons, it was the sole orthodoxy of the sword vein. There were no Orthodox Taoist or Buddhist temples on the planet. Of course, there was no space for heterodox sects to exist. Here, only the sword vein existed. There were many inheritances of the sword vein. The cultivators in the nearby regions rarely called them by their specific sections. Anyway, these swordsmen closed their doors and stayed together outside the region. Therefore, they were collectively called the Scarlet Swordsmen. Over time, it became an official name for them in the Western Heaven. The Scarlet Star's name had its origin. It was because the fire energy on this planet was abnormally strong. It was easy to imagine the connections of this orthodoxy in the Western Heaven cultivation world. Among the 4 quadrants of the universe, the Eastern Heaven was dominated by Taoists. Even the immortal monarch in charge was a Taoist immortal monarch. In the Southern Heaven, there were more ancient, strange, and demonic beasts. In the Northern Heaven, it was the quadrant of innate and acquired spiritual treasures. Of course, there was a difference in the ratio. Human cultivators were still the dominant force. In the Eastern Heaven, Taoists were 60%, Buddhists were 30%, and the remaining 10% was equally divided between demonic beasts and spiritual treasures. In the Northern Heaven and Southern Heaven, the ratio of demonic beasts and spiritual treasures increased to 20% or 30%. In Western Elephant Heaven, Buddhism accounted for 50% of the population, Taoism accounted for 30%, and the remaining 20% was made up of all sorts of random forces. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for the Scarlet Star to survive for so long if they were not powerful enough. This was because the Buddhist inheritance was far more permeable than Taoists. It was all-pervasive and would take advantage of any gap. With such strength, it was easy to imagine the situation in the Western Quadrant, where Buddhists were the dominant force. They persevered for many years, but in the chaos of the universe and the change of the era, they had no choice but to face the most severe test since the establishment of their own sect. An alliance formed by the surrounding Buddhist forces used a groundless accusation as an excuse to follow the example of the Eastern Heaven Alliance and attack the Scarlet Star in the Western Heaven. The war had been going on for many years and was still in a stalemate. However, it was clear that it was only a matter of time before they failed to contend with the mainstream of the Western Heaven. This was also the reason why Tumuyin was so worried in the exterior realm. Unfortunately, he could not return. Even if he did, what could he do? If he could return, a group of Western Heaven Buddhists in the exterior realm could return. They would not divulge the specific inside story, the formation of the alliance, the overall plan, and the progress of the war. All they talked about was the general and obvious things. Of course, with their status, it was impossible for them to know everything. The only one who knew more was the Buddha, who was killed by Lu Xiaoyi. This was not a small problem, but a big one. He had long been tired of attacking and defending the realm. He had played the 5 rings of the blue sky, Zhou Xian's defense, and Hengyi's breaking the realm. In fact, it was very boring. He also did not think that it was meaningful for a demigod like him to get involved. Standing in this position, he should be able to see deeper and further. He also finally understood why these 3 people were afraid and did not run away. They thought that he was a master among the Scarlet Swordsmen. If you go back, how will you explain the death of one of your primordial spirits? Lu Xiaoyi asked with great interest. The remaining Buddha smiled bitterly. I'm afraid we can only tell the truth. Senior's death cannot be hidden from others. Even if the 3 of us die on the spot, everything that happened here will not be lost. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. This was a small threat. Even ants would drag out their lives, let alone humans. Then, I have a request, and I hope the 3 of you can agree to it. If you agree, I am not a person who kills indiscriminately. If you don't agree, I will do as I please. The Buddha plucked up his courage. As long as it doesn't go against our Buddha's heart, Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. What Buddha's heart and Tao's heart? It's just the human heart. I'm not here to ask you to betray anyone or do something that is contrary to the bottom line of a cultivator. What I mean is that you can go back and report the truth, but you must report it to the higher-ups. You can't spread this trivial matter all over the city. Just say that the interior Heavenly Lu brought a torture puppet to this region and was questioned by you, which led to these misunderstandings. Do you understand what I mean? The three monks were shocked. They did not know who Inspector Lu was, but they knew very well what kind of place the interior Heavenly Lu was. They interrogated the suspicious cultivators who passed by, but they did not expect to catch an interior demigod. No wonder their senior died so easily. He did not even have a chance to struggle. They knew very well what this demigod meant. If they wanted to escalate the situation, they should roll up their sleeves and treat him as the Scarlet Swordsman. If they did not want to escalate the situation beyond their control, there would be more to come. A foreign swordsman came here at the right time. Who would believe that he was just passing by? He must have come directly from the interior Heavenly Lu to end this war. The situation was getting serious. Chapter 1956. The Buddha felt that the burden on his shoulders was very heavy. He knew very well what it meant to be a half-immortal. When the universe entered the middle stage, half-immortal monsters appeared not only in the eastern sky, but also in the other three heavens. Because of the clash between the inner and western sky and the eastern sky, there were a few monsters of the interior level in the eastern sky. Therefore, the monsters of the exterior level, who were far ahead in terms of numbers, preferred to run to the northwest and southern sky. They subconsciously avoided the eastern sky, which was a tiger's den. Therefore, in the western sky, there were frequent rumors of half-immortals fighting with the cultivators of the main world. What was worse was that the young gods were at a disadvantage. As far as he knew, there were half-immortals in the Scarlet Red, but they were real half-immortals who could not come down. Therefore, when all half-immortals could freely enter and leave, the elimination of the Scarlet Red became the most important thing. This could take 1,000 years, or even less. All the arrangements were based on this, but now, a powerful half-immortal swordsman had appeared. What was hidden in this? Was it a coincidence? Was it deliberate? Was it an individual act? Or was it an outpost of the swordsman army? This was a matter of great importance. Don't worry, great immortal. We know the severity of the matter. We can't guarantee anything else, but we will definitely pass the news directly to the higher-ups of the Alliance. We won't spread it in advance. The three of them left hurriedly. It seemed that they were really anxious. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. The situation forced him to reveal his identity. He had no choice. He liked to pretend to be weak. Even after becoming a half-immortal, he did not change this bad habit. However, he also knew that he had to look at the occasion. If he did not look at the time and place and only showed his face for himself, this kind of trouble would only get bigger and bigger. Moreover, with his current status and reputation, there was really no need for him to pretend in the main world. Although the three monks did not speak clearly and did not tell the truth, some basic information could not be wrong. For example, the war had been going on for several years. For example, the battlefield had long changed from a territorial attack to a battle in outer space. In such a situation, great changes could happen at any time. Either the Crimson Sword sect would be destroyed, or the Alliance would suffer heavy losses. The hatred between the two sides would grow deeper and deeper. When the hatred between the two sides was irreconcilable, it would be impossible to resolve it. One side would have to be completely destroyed. This is the Western Heaven. Can Buddhism be completely wiped out? Therefore, Scarlet's current situation was very dangerous. She had reached a point where she could not afford any delays. This was also not an occasion for him to pretend. When he first heard about this, he had a general principle in his heart. First of all, his participation could not change anything on the tactical level. This was not a conflict that could be solved by one person. Secondly, it was impossible for him to gather the swordsman army. The distance to do so could not be covered even in 1,000 years. Therefore, the only possibility was to reconcile the dispute between the two sides and see if they could reach a truce agreement that both sides could accept. He was a half-immortal, not a human immortal. It was impossible for them to guard this place forever. Such a guard was an insult to the sword range. War is the art of compromise. After reaching the half-immortal realm, he began to slowly wake up. There was no other way to stop this war immediately. The only thing he could do was to reveal his identity. He hoped that this would make this so-called alliance hesitate and buy him some time. As for now, he had to find the Scarlet Swordsman group as soon as possible. He had to set up a truce period between the two sides and try to reach a consensus during this time. Of course, the three monks did not know where the main force of the Scarlet Swordsman group was. They could only tell him the location of the Scarlet Star, and he had to find it himself. Hopefully, he could make it in time. Lu Xiaoyi was no longer floating like a corpse. He was flying at full speed. As he flew, he took out the star map that Tu Muyun had given him and compared it with the map. Finally, he found his position. There was still a month before the Scarlet Star. This field battle was quite bold. He didn't hide his figure, but swaggered and showed off his aura. Along the way, there were several patrol squads similar to the 4 people from before, but they didn't pose a threat to him. He just sped up and rushed over. His real goal was not to attract the attention of these monks, but to attract the attention of the Scarlet Swordsman. There was no way to find them in the vast universe. He could only let them find him first. This strategy was quite effective. Half a month later, he shook off a target who was trying to approach him from the side. Lu Xiaoyi wanted to test the waters. He swung his sword from afar, and the person immediately drew his sword to defend himself. Then, he suddenly turned around and tightened his sword. The person was already immobilized. From his appearance, he still looked like a monk. His Tao realm was mainly Buddhist. However, he was using a real flying sword. It was not a sword pill or a coiling sword, but a Zen sword. At first glance, he looked like a swordsman disguised as a monk. However, Lu Xiaoyi knew that he was not in disguise. This was because the famous Scarlet Swordsman in the Western Elephant Heaven was a Buddhist sword sect. Who said that the swordsman had to be from a Taoist sect? He could also be from a Buddhist sect. In terms of breadth and depth, the Buddhist sect was not much worse than the Taoist sect. Since the Taoist sect had a sword that protected Tao, it was not surprising that the Buddhist sect could have a sword that protected Tao. Tu Muyun had vaguely mentioned this before. This was also the awkward part of the Scarlet Sword vein. To the Buddhist sect, they were a sword vein, but to the Taoist sect, they were monks. Neither side was good, and both sides were just eating melons. Life was also very hard. Lu Xiaoyi had consulted a few of his senior brothers in the exterior realm about this. He wanted to know their views on the Buddhist sword vein. In the end, he was deeply moved by Tinxi's words. Seeing is believing. It had been more than 10,000 years since Tu Muyun left the Scarlet Sword vein and came to the exterior realm. As he spent all his time in the clouds of the sword vein, he obviously valued his identity as a swordsman more than a Buddhist sect. Therefore, he was naturally a swordsman. However, no one could tell the exact situation of the Crimson Sword range. Therefore, he was told not to jump to conclusions in advance. Everything had to be seen first. The real sword range did not depend on where one's cultivation method came from, or whether one wore a monk's robe or a Taoist's robe. However, one's heart for the sword could never be deceived. It was obvious at a glance. Lu Xiaoyi deeply agreed. It was precisely because of this sword vein orthodoxy of the Buddhist sect that he didn't feel too much of a sense of urgency. It was placed at the back of the schedule, but he didn't expect that it would be thrown here by an exterior immortal monarch. He had to do something about it. He did not rush to curry favor with the monk. Instead, he was indifferent. Are you a Buddhist? Or a sword vein? How could the monk not know his identity when he saw his attire? It was like a Chinese chef bumping into a Western chef. Although they were of the same trade, they had to ask about the cuisine first. If it was a half-cooked dish, he might not be able to get close to it. Chapter 1957. The Scarlet Swordsman was very careful. As a swordsman, he could clearly feel the strength of this fellow. We are from the Scarlet Zen Sword sect, but if you want to ask me which is more important, then of course, the sword is more important. Lu Xiaoyi did not comment. This was the reason why he had a headache over this place, and the reason why he could not rashly join in. If Wei Jianshan was here, he would have directly attacked the higher-ups of the alliance and killed them until they were convinced. But obviously, it was not so simple now. Whether they were willing to accept his help was another matter altogether. Tu Muyun had not descended to the moral world for 10,000 years, and the situation there was constantly changing. There was a small change in 100 years, and a big change in 1,000 years. What would happen in 10,000 years? If I say that I want to go to your secret gathering place, are you willing to lead the way? Lu Xiaoyi exuded the aura of a half-immortal, which was completely different from that of a young god. Although the monk's realm was not high, he was still a Yin god bodhisattva, so he immediately understood. His thoughts turned quickly. He considered the significance of the half-immortal realm, and then considered the style of the swordsman. He was also a decisive person, so he immediately made up his mind. If that's the case, I am willing to lead the way. He turned and leaped to the side, and Lu Xiaoyi followed closely behind. The Sword Buddha had many questions. He wanted to know if this was a coincidence, or the support of the Taoist sword sect with a purpose. In Western Elephant Heaven, the Taoist veins were weaker, not to mention the Taoist sword sect. There was no space for them to survive. In the Eastern Heaven, the Buddhist sect had no way to deal with these so-called lunatics of the Tao sword. Part of the reason was that their fighting strength was astonishing, but the bigger reason was that they were in a place where Taoism flourished in the Eastern Heaven. He had doubts in his heart. He did not know if the appearance of the swordsman of the half-immortal realm was a blessing or a curse for them. This mentality was impossible in other elephant heavens, but this was Western Heaven. Even if they were from the sword vein, they would never be able to erase the obvious Buddhist brand on them. What's your surname? Can you tell me the details of the battle? Lu Xiaoyi was very courteous. He was no longer the young and inexperienced person he used to be. The most obvious change was that he was more willing to think for others. In his opinion, the Xianyuan sword vein, or rather, the Taoist sword vein, was the authentic one. There was no doubt about this. However, it was possible to think so in the Eastern Heaven, but not necessarily in the Western Heaven. Perhaps people thought that the Buddhist sword system was the authentic sword vein system? The Sword Buddha hesitated for a moment and decided to tell the truth. I'm Yutan, and I'm patrolling the distant region for the Crimson Buddha's sword vein. I'll tell you the truth. Yutan explained everything in detail, and Lu Xiaoyi finally had a general understanding of the world-ending war in Western Heaven. To be honest, both overtly and covertly, it was inseparable from the changes in Eastern Heaven. The time when the Crimson Star's abnormality appeared was a few hundred years ago. If one carefully calculated the timeline, it should be within 100 years after the First Great War of the Five Rings. The situation suddenly became tense. There was no special reason for it. The Crimson Star and the forces in the surrounding realms had always been on bad terms. After a long time, they were entangled in tension. Sometimes they fought, and sometimes they cooperated. Sometimes they fought, and sometimes they cooperated. It was not a big fight, and they did not cooperate. It was just awkward, and everyone made do with each other. Therefore, when the situation became tense, the Crimson Star did not pay too much attention to it. They were also very clear that when the universe changed and the era changed, the Western Heaven, like all the other heavens, was bound to undergo a reshuffling process to consolidate their position and eliminate dissidents. A nondescript orthodoxy like theirs was probably the first to bear the brunt of it. The Taoist forces in Western Heaven could not be moved by the Buddhists, just like how the Eastern Heaven Taoists could not move the Buddhists. Therefore, the most dangerous ones were not the Taoists, but the ones like them who did not rely on either side. To resist foreign aggression, one must first pacify internal affairs. Therefore, preparations had been made for a long time. For example, the distribution of seeds, the contraction of resources, the intensification of war preparations, and so on. The more difficult problem for them was how to find allies. It was too difficult. On one hand, it was because their swordsman characteristics were not liked by others. On the other hand, it was because the environment they were in was too awkward. They were different from the rest of the Buddhists. They were the Buddhists in the eyes of the Taoists. They were the orthodox among the unorthodox, and they were the heretics in the eyes of the orthodox. You haven't formed your own alliance for hundreds of years. Your relationship is. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Yu Tan looked ashamed. This is a problem left behind by history, and it has never been completely solved. In addition, we did not expect it to come so soon. We thought it would come at the end of the universe's transformation, but we did not expect it to come earlier. Moreover, we also have internal problems. Being in such a state of constant vigilance for a long period of time would cause one's perception of danger to be dulled. This was an unavoidable mentality. Moreover, they probably did not expect that everything that happened in the Western Paradise was actually closely related to the changes in the Eastern Paradise. The Buddhists were rebuffed in the Eastern Paradise, so it was normal for them to seek revenge or compensation in the Western Paradise. To put it bluntly, the Western Heaven's Buddha sword vein was dragged down by the Eastern Heaven's Tao sword vein. Lu Xiaoyi listened quietly. It was not convenient for him to ask some questions. Whether he said it or not depended on himself. If he was smart, he would solve it as soon as possible when the demigods came down. If he pretended to be stupid, he could only bear it himself. Yu Tan was a smart person. On the way back, he also weighed the whole matter. They needed help and external forces to intervene. They could not hold on by themselves. The war had been going on for several years now. To be able to hold on for such a long time in a war with such disparity in strength was not only because of their combat power, but also because of their correct battle strategy. From the beginning, they gave up on attacking and defending the realm. They gave up the Scarlet Star and destroyed the realm's grand membrane. The significance of this was that even if the realm was occupied by others, because the grand membrane was destroyed and the demigods could not come down to rebuild it, it would not be used as a tool by the Buddhists. Without the grand membrane, everyone could not fight a defensive battle. This was a very painful but very effective decision. All the Scarlet Buddha swordsmen, Yuanying and above went out to the void of the universe to fight guerrilla warfare. Relying on their familiarity with the space, they came and went like the wind. They did not fight a decisive battle but only harassed. This made the Buddhist alliance unable to do anything. There were many strange techniques in the Buddhist alliance, but the problem was that in a sense, the Scarlet was also a branch of the Buddhist alliance. Therefore, they fought back and forth and it became a terrible battle. If the Hengyi realm had learned this move, it would have been troublesome for Lu Xiaoyi and the others. Unfortunately, in terms of battle, the people of Hengyi realm were not as sharp as the swordsmen, even if this was a special Buddhist swordsman. However, this kind of fighting style would eventually be familiar to the opponent. The opponent was also familiar with the familiar space. With the gathering of the Buddhist alliance's power, the Scarlet Swordsman's space to maneuver became smaller and smaller. They were also forced further and further away from the realm. Seeing that they were so powerless, there was a voice that said that they were going to fight a big battle. A reversal of the situation. But this was also what the Buddhist alliance hoped for. Chapter 1958. Having made up his mind, Yu Tan decided to tell the truth. If you want someone to help you, you should at least tell the truth, right? It was simple logic. We can still hold on. Scarlet still has dozens of great Buddhas, hundreds of Buddhas, and countless Yuanying. They are also a force to be reckoned with, and have no problems in battle. Our problem comes from within. It's not about whether or not to go to war, but the direction of scarlet orthodoxy. Since he had chosen to speak, Yu Tan spoke faster and faster, as if he would never finish. Scarlet is the Buddhist sword vein, and cultivates the Zen sword. The so-called Zen sword is both Zen and sword. After tens of thousands of years, is Zen more important? Or is the sword more important? This has always been a debate within scarlet orthodoxy. If we had chosen Zen, which is also a requirement of the Western Buddhist sects, then perhaps we would not be in this predicament. But this also means that one day, scarlet orthodoxy will no longer live by the sword, and will become like other Buddhist orthodoxies, with many branches, each with their own Tao. The Zen sword is just one of them, and the proportion will continue to decrease. If we had chosen the sword, we would not have been able to avoid the suppression of the Western Buddhist sects. We may be swordsmen forever, but the biggest problem is how to survive, just like now. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. This was a bit like the Huashan sword sect and the Master of Qi. Things were getting more and more complicated, and his head was hurting. What about history? Yu Tan explained, in history, the scarlet sword vein originated from a group of wandering swordsmen, but it was too far away to investigate. They took root in scarlet orthodoxy, and because of the environment of the universe at that time, they began to fuse with Buddhism in order to survive. They fought and killed, and in the end, a genius swordsman created the Zen sword technique and finally established a foothold in scarlet orthodoxy. But at the core, the sword was the most important, and the Zen was the least important. That was the true philosophy of the ancestors. The so-called Zen was just a cover to fool the surrounding Buddhist sections. That was the original intention. But the original intention can change. Yu Tan sighed, the environment determines the orthodoxy, that is the truth. If the ancestors were to settle down in the eastern sky, it would definitely be a sword vein. However, once they set foot in Crimson, they would inevitably deviate towards Buddhism. In the mortal world, if this place doesn't want me, there will naturally be a place for me. Our ideals are different, so I'll just leave. But in the cultivation world, the place was bigger and the space was wider, but there was no place to stay. Unless they leave the Western paradise. But you also know that when a Tao orthodoxy moves across the celestial realm, it is no longer a matter of injuring their muscles and bones. It is a matter of losing their arms, legs, and heads. He could only persevere here. In perseverance, when the pressure from Buddhism was greater, he would lean towards the direction of Zen. When the pressure was less, he would lean back towards the direction of the sword. However, being in the Western heaven, Buddhism was always under great pressure. It was under such imperceptible influence that the Crimson Orthodoxy started from the core position of the sword, to the rise of the Zen, and finally to a tie in the end, especially in the last 10,000 years, because the epoch is about to change. This shift has become even more obvious. Yu Tan said hatefully, we are very clear about the Alliance's intentions. It is not that they have set their sights on the Crimson Star, nor is it that they want to uproot us. What they mean is that they hope for the Zen to take over the dominant position in the Crimson Orthodoxy, slowly squeezing out the living space of the sword. Over time, the Crimson Orthodoxy will be completely assimilated into the power of Buddhism. At that time, it is hard to say if there will be any Zen swords left. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't help but sigh. Another Tao Orthodoxy's tragedy. He could guess what would happen next. Originally, if there was no great change in the epoch, such subtle changes would have happened in another 10,000 years. When the time came, the Crimson Orthodoxy would have been completely controlled by the Zen, and there would not even be any resistance. It would have been a natural change, and there would not even be a single Dharma assembly. This was the method that Buddhism was best at. They would not even have the strength to struggle when they realized what was going on. Perhaps there would only be a few old and young survivors singing sad songs, and they would not even be able to see the splash of water when they fell into the tide. On this point, even Taoism could not compare. In terms of ideology, Taoism was more tolerant. You just had to admit that you were a branch of Taoism. If you did not want to, you must become the orthodox Taoism like the Three Pure Ones or Zhou. Of course, there was also the determination of the founding ancestors like Emperor Xianyuan. They mercilessly extinguished all methods other than the sword. They did not give any chance for other ideologies to grow stronger. That was why there was the current Xianyuan. The Crimson Orthodoxy was not good. The environment was not good, and the founding ancestors were not firm enough. As a result, the loopholes became bigger and bigger, to the point that it could even compete with the mainstream sword. Originally, this should have been a natural transition process, but the epic change disrupted the rhythm of Buddhism's layout in the Western paradise. In the two universe wars in the Eastern paradise, Lu Xiaoyi's little shit stick made a commotion, completely messing up the already urgent rhythm. Buddhism had no choice but to follow this chaotic rhythm, and they could only take action in advance. In the Western paradise, taking the Crimson Orthodoxy as an example, now was not the right time to take action. Originally, the Zen monks of the Crimson Orthodoxy could have peacefully transitioned after a few years. Now, with the siege of the Buddhist alliance, they were gathered together again. In the current situation, the heart of the sword was not dead yet. They would rather die than submit to the invasion of foreign enemies. After several years of war, the situation is not good. Morale has begun to drop, and there is no hope. At this time, the Zen school of thought has begun to rise again. After several years of war, the backbone of the sword school has suffered great losses. Under the contrast of power, the situation has begun to develop in an inexplicable direction. This poor monk is from the sword school. I admit that I am a monk. But I am also a swordsman. I do not wish for the future Crimson to become a completely lifeless Buddhist land, but there is nothing I can do about it. Staying in the secret base is too stifling, so I asked for this job to relieve my boredom. I did not expect to meet you, great immortal. Lu Xiaoyi roughly understood, but his headache worsened. Then, as a member of the Crimson Orthodoxy, if you had the ability to manage the entire situation, what would you do? Yutan was a little confused. Lu Xiaoyi was even more straightforward. Let's put it this way. Do you know Tu Muyun? If you were Tu Muyun from the exterior world, what would you do? Yutan was a little stuttering. Ancestor Yun is still alive? Lu Xiaoyi was impatient. He won't die for a while, but if he knew that you guys were so talkative and timid, he probably wouldn't have needed to ascend to immortality. He might as well have climbed the ladder and hung himself. That would have saved me a lot of trouble. You have to know that in the later period of the universe's chaos, even half-immortals could come down, including your ancestor Yun. You don't want him to see Scarlet in such an unlucky state where she can't even solve her own internal problems, do you? Chapter 1959. Lu Xiaoyi had no choice but to remind him as the two of them traveled back and forth in the void. You just have to lead the way. Don't worry about whether someone is following behind you, understand? Only then did Yutan stop his meaningless attempts to scare himself. Thinking about it, what kind of abnormality would a half-immortal not be able to discover? More than 10 days later, the two of them passed by the Scarlet Star very close to it. Crimson, gorgeous crimson, bright red, 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 these words were very appropriate to describe this celestial body. This was because the fire element energy on the celestial body was very strong, causing the entire celestial body to be in a state as if it was being burned by fire. But in fact, there were still humans living here. It was just that the number of humans here was not as high as that of a normal world. The physique of the mortals here was also different from that of a normal star field. They could not migrate and adapt to the environment here. This is the Scarlet Star, which is what the Scarlet people call it. But the Buddhists of the Western Paradise don't call it that. They call it the Red Lotus Domain, after the meaning of the Red Lotus Hellfire. Just this name alone is enough to place us in the Buddhist sect's hierarchy. If we comply with them, we can survive and preach here. If we don't, we will take back the Red Lotus Holy Land that originally belonged to the Buddhists. This has always been a saying, but recently it has become very popular. Lu Xiaoyi smiled faintly. In fact, it's just a saying. If you take a fancy to it, you will be part of the Buddhists' fate. That's all. After passing by, they gradually distanced themselves from the other side of the Scarlet Star. Yu Tan introduced, the Scarlet Star is now in the hands of the Western Paradise Buddhist Alliance, but this kind of occupation is meaningless in the short term. To change the influence of the Zen sword on the Scarlet Star is not something that can be done in a day, so we are not in a hurry to take it back. But if this goes on for a long time, the basic cultivation forces will not be able to continue, then how long can we last? A few hundred years later, without a new generation of Yuanying to replace them, the current Yuanying can only wither away, except for a few upper-level perfected monarchs. The swordsman group that can fight will only be left with perfected monarchs. In another 1,000 years, perhaps only the primordial spirit and yang spirit will be left. What is the point of persevering like this? A month later, the two of them came to a comet and went in from the tail of the comet. This place was not bad. It was not suitable for large groups to fight, but it was very convenient for small groups to disperse and leave. Because of the comet's own characteristics, the Buddhist divine arts were not very effective here. Of course, the premise was that the strength of the Western Heavens Buddhist sect had to be careful of their own casualties. If they went all out, the huge disadvantage in numbers would never be able to make up for it. After entering Star Explosion, Lu Xiaoyi already knew where these Buddhist swordsmen gathered even without Yutan's guidance. He followed Yu Tan all the way into the depths, and more Zen swordsmen appeared in his perception. Because they were in the tail of the comet, there were no large meteorites for them to gather together. Therefore, they were basically in a group. The situation was worse than he had imagined. Although he did not know how much damage the Crimson Sword vein had suffered over the years, he did not care about the casualties. The swordsmen did not have the heart to kill, so why would they cultivate the sword? They should just pray to Buddha. Yu Tan brought a stranger back. This was not a new thing during the war. During the war, there was always a need for eyes and ears. No matter how indifferent he was, he still had some friends. He was a Buddha, so he knew what was important and had the right to do so. Yu Tan was still there reminding him, "Mighty immortal, I will lead you to the place later. Please don't be impatient. I will inform my senior brothers to come and see you." Lu Xiaoyi ignored his clamor. His time here was limited, so he did not have the time to do things slowly. The sooner he finished, the sooner he could relax. There was still a lot of bad debt waiting to be settled. As soon as the flying sword flew out, millions of sword lights formed a huge sword dragon that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. It rampaged through the comet as if it was unstoppable. The comet dust and the small meteorites under the buttocks of the Zen swords were all scattered and smashed into pieces. The sword whistled, not like someone who came to help, but more like someone who came to destroy the place. How could Yu Tan stop it? In the midst of the awkwardness, he did not need to inform them one by one. From the Sun Spirit to the Yuanying and the Crimson Sword vein, all of them were gathered here. Yu Tan knew that he might have gotten into big trouble. He seemed to be a very polite person. Why did he start to go crazy as soon as he arrived? He hurriedly went forward and used his fastest speed to explain everything to his senior brothers. Before he could finish explaining, he saw that his senior brother's eyes had already changed. When he turned back, a red stone sword was floating in front of the madman. The sword's letter was swallowing in and out, as if it was about to swallow someone whole. Few people with low realms, such as the Bodhisattvas, recognized this sword, but all the great Buddhas knew it. Everyone at the Buddha level knew that this was the inherited treasure of the Crimson Sword vein, the Lei sword. They were also known as the Three Stone Swords. One of them had disappeared with the first ancestor, and its whereabouts were unknown. Another one had been taken to the exterior realm by the ancestor Tu Muyun, and the last one had been placed in the Scarlet Star. Now, it was being carried around by a great Buddha and was being kept safe. Now that the stone sword was out, the sword box on the great Buddha's back vibrated uncontrollably. It could not be controlled and soared into the sky. The two stone swords intertwined with each other, emitting a fierce light. The great and small Buddhas bowed down one by one. They paid more attention to etiquette than the Taoists. Then, it was the bodhisattvas who came to their senses. Lu Xiaoyi did not feel guilty at all. Bowing to the stone sword was the same as bowing to him. It did not matter what they bowed to, the key was that it was useful. What was the use of bowing to old two? They still had to bow to him. He exhaled and said in a very vulgar manner, "Old two is dying. He can't come down himself, so he begged me to come down and wipe his ass. Now that I've taken a look, I see that all of you are leaking. Can you wipe it clean? It's better not to wipe it. Smelling is also a choice." The great and small Buddhas below were depressed. First, he was a half-immortal and had the confidence to be rude. Second, he was invited by the ancestor Yun and the stone sword could not be faked. Third, they heard that the swordsman of the Eastern Heaven was classified as a heterodox sect. They were one of the most vulgar and one of the most vulgar in the universe. They were famous for being barbaric. If a person who was usually gentle spoke vulgarities, it must be because he was forced to do so. But if a man spoke vulgarities, it could be his catchphrase. Maybe it was a kind of friendly way of expressing himself. Everyone understood very well. The great Buddha asked sadly, "What happened to the ancestor Yun? Did he die of old age? Or was he killed by a traitor in the exterior realm? It looks like he will be able to come down in 1,000 years. This. Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand, "It's not what you think. If old two wants to become an immortal, how many thousands of years would it take for an immortal to appear? Isn't that the same as courting death? That's why I said he's dying. Let's not talk about someone who's dying. Now that the Scarlet Man is talking, who agrees? Who objects?" Chapter 1960. This was the typical behavior of a crazy swordsman. But Lu Xiaoyi had his reasons for doing so. In Xianyuan, Wei Sword Mountain, Firmament Sword Sect, and Western Bright Sword Mansion, if he dared to be so presumptuous, he would have been beaten to a pulp. This was the essence of a real swordsman. He dared to draw his sword against anyone. But not here. Lu Xiaoyi knew that they lacked the basic essence, qi, and spirit after just one look. The people here did not need discussion and respect, but orders and power. Back then, when Tu Muyun had introduced his sect to him, he had also said that the Scarlet Sword Mountain Range was very respectful of their lineage and ancestors. They were very strict about rules. In order to make it easier for him to reach out, giving him the stone sword represented everything. It was a hot potato, but also a form of trust. Lu Xiaoyi did not want to use it. He did not want to keep a low profile and pretend to be stupid, then take out the stone sword to show off. There were many ways to pretend to be stupid. Some were to show off first, and some were to show off all the way. Just feel good. This time, he did not have to keep a low profile, and there was a different kind of spirit. The scene fell into a dead silence. With Lei Jian and the swordsman around, everything should have been natural. But the problem was that this swordsman was not the Cloud Ancestor. He was not even the Scarlet Man. He was just a swordsman, and a swordsman at that. Then, could he entrust his life to? Could he entrust the domain? Could he entrust his future? A great Buddha stood up and tried to soften his tone. "We think that at least we have the right to know your plan, right? The situation of the Scarlet Man is complicated. Perhaps the great immortal does not understand?" Lu Xiaoyi rejected. "What do I need to understand? You all understand, but now you are reduced to hiding in the tail of a comet? My time is precious. Although I was entrusted by Tu Muyun, I do not have much time to care about your trivial matters. How about this? I'm not an unreasonable person. I'll set the time into 3 points. 1 year later, you have the right to decide whether to accept my guidance or not. 3 years later, you'll have the same opportunity. Then, 10 years later, but before that, you all have to treat me as your cloud ancestor. Is there a problem? In other words, he would be in charge of taking everything for a year. Then, everyone would judge based on the situation. This method was neither good nor bad. He could give face to the cloud ancestor and make his own decisions after a year. It was only a year, so there shouldn't be any major problems, right? The leader of the young gods was very cautious. May I know your name, immortal? Where's the immortal village? Which orthodoxy is it? Lu Xiaoyi looked at them coldly. Lu Xiaoyi. The entire scene was silent, and not a single person dared to make a sound. Lu Xiaoyi's name had started to spread throughout the universe after the First Universe War, but it was mostly limited to the Eastern Elephant Sky and the Northern Sky. His fame was still within the origin world, so it was still considered normal. However, after the Second Universe War in the Eastern Sky, the speed of his fame's spread expanded to a point where it was somewhat uncontrollable. This was because it involved the outer and outer scenic skies. The destruction of the Han River realm was a warning to all the powerful realms. The collision between the inner and outer scenic skies had made him infamous in the half-immortal world. He had even reached the exterior enforcer level. He had shocked the unspeakable lands, vowed to hunt down the half-immortals who had committed crimes, and went against the immortal monarch. After doing such a big thing, he still retained the position of enforcer in the heavenly eyes. Was he going to be promoted to a permanent worker? The heavens really didn't have eyes. When all of this was combined with the things that this person was showing now, it seemed normal. Such a person should have such a domineering aura. If he were to say something soft, would he still be Lu Xiaoyi? As the leader of the Origin World Swordsman system, no, now he might even have the inner and outer scenic skies. With this person in charge, Scarlet should still have hope, right? This was the thought of the hot-blooded people, but rational people wouldn't think so. In the cultivation world, the strength of an individual couldn't be compared to the strength of a group. He wasn't the only half-immortal who could come down. There were many. 1 or 2 of them might not be his match, but what about 8 or 10 or more? In the First Universe War, he was famous because he had the swordsman army under his command. He relied on the strength of a group. In the Second Universe War, it was even more exaggerated that he could destroy a world. The lineup of 300 sun gods was still the strength of a group. In the collision of the inner and outer scenic skies, there were 4 inner scenic skies and 50 evildoers following. It was still the strength of a group. The outer scenic sky of the enforcers and dozens of enforcers were forever the strength of a group. This was the essence. People always liked to see things on the surface of hot-blooded impulses, but the truth hidden under the surface was what made people alert. So now, where was the strength of a group? Just based on the defeated soldiers of the Scarlet Buddha Sword vein? It might be strong enough for a realm, but for an alliance, especially an alliance like the Buddhist sect, it was like a firefly to the bright moon. There was no comparison. Even if the firefly was guided by a lantern. The matter was settled for the time being. The Scarlet Swordsman recognized the 1-year limit. Just based on the name Lu Xiaoyi, it was worth it. At the very least, the battles he led didn't seem to have been defeated. From the beginning to the end, Lu Xiaoyi didn't mention a word about the battle of the Zen Sword and Scarlet. He couldn't mention it. How could he mention it? This wasn't something that could be solved by talking. He could only rely on fighting. Blood. Everyone dispersed in excitement. Only the 2 great Buddhas didn't leave. I'm Dragon Pool. Greetings, Enforcer Lu. I'm Zhao Jian. Greetings, Enforcer Lu. There was no need to guess. They must be the leaders of the Zen and Sword factions. Judging from their auras, Long Tan was from the Sword faction, and Zhao Jian was from the Zen faction. They didn't try to hide it, but Lu Xiaoyi deliberately ignored them. There are 2 things to do now. The two great Buddhas wanted to get close to him, but they didn't expect Enforcer Lu to be so resolute. They hurriedly replied, "Please speak, Enforcer. We'll obey." Lu Xiaoyi stretched out a finger. "First, from today onwards, all Scarlet Swordsmen are only allowed to enter and not leave. Try to recall the scattered patrolling outside. Can you do that? Was this the rhythm of a big war?" The two great Buddhas were excited and worried, but they didn't show it. At their level, shrewdness was necessary. They couldn't see anything now. Even if there was a problem, they would have to wait until they had some clues. He stretched out a second finger. "Do you have some kind of connection with the Western Heaven Buddhist Alliance? Direct or indirect?" Zhao Jian nodded. "Yes, indirect means some forces are negotiating with each other and taking on some things that neither side wants to do personally, such as the exchange of prisoners of war." Lu Xiaoyi nodded. "Okay, don't give up on this line. Within 10 days, we have to make sure this line is unblocked." Dragon Pool and Zhao Jian looked at each other. They were both very surprised. This was basically saying that there would be news. What kind of news would it be? News of the Alliance gathering? Or some other unexpected surprise? This line had always been unblocked. This was also the norm in the war between cultivators. They could avoid some situations that neither side wanted to see. Just like when Heaven's Choice and Zhou Xian fought, it didn't affect the upper echelon's communication. Chapter 1961. Just as Lu Xiaoyi and Yu Tan were hurrying back, several great Buddhas on the Scarlet Star were in a solemn mood. A piece of bad news that could not be any worse had disrupted their overall plan. Monk 5 Dynasties, a great Buddha, was the leader of this alliance. He was highly respected, experienced, and had unfathomable strength. The power behind him was also incomparably strong. His name was Great Holy Heavens, and was one of the few great realms in the western sky that could compare to the top realms in the eastern sky. His realm did not join the alliance. The reason was simple. It was not that he did not want to join, but he could not. The distance was too far, just like the distance between the 5 rings of the eastern sky and Zhou Xian. No matter which realm it was, it would be troublesome to travel for hundreds of years. However, the alliance this time was indeed formed by his realm. It was because of his deep connections, powerful background, and the vision of the Buddhist forces around the Scarlet Star. Scarlet Star was located in a region where there had not been any powerful realms in the past hundreds of years. However, there were many mid-sized realms like the Scarlet Star. This time, under the leadership of the Great Sage Heavens, they had finally formed a regional alliance. To be honest, it was not easy at all. Because it was difficult to reconcile everyone's needs, the cake was only so big. It was inevitable that there would not be enough to go around if too many people came. Right now, the alliance was more agreeable to the distribution plan. None of them were willing to submit to each other. Thus, the great Buddha of Great Holy Heavens was the leader. This was also a method. The only shortcoming was that this leader did not have his own strength. Fortunately, the Scarlet Star was not so strong that it could not be shaken. They could still fight the war. However, the war did not go well from the start. Although the Scarlet Star was a Buddhist swordsman, since they were swordsmen, they were full of intuition towards battle. They were prepared early on, and their strategy was very targeted. They directly gave up on the Scarlet Star, causing the Alliance army to rush over empty-handed. There were no secrets in large-scale cultivation wars. This was the truth, whether it was the eastern sky or the western sky. Once the rhythm of the war entered guerrilla warfare, there was no possibility of a quick victory. This was destined to be a grinding war, which made many of the Allied forces very unhappy. After all, not everyone was willing to drift outside for so many years and have a lot of things to do at home. Scarlet was not the only opponent in the Western Heaven. There were many similar undisciplined and heretical forces. The most important thing was that the forces of Taoism were their real enemy. This would never change. Lu Xiaoyi? Is that shit stirrer from the eastern sky here? What should he do? After stirring up their own shit, they went to stir up their neighbor's shit. A great Buddha was very depressed. There was no way he wouldn't be depressed. If it was a half-immortal, they would not be too afraid because they can also find half-immortal helpers. But Lu Xiaoyi is different. Perhaps it will be very difficult to find a half-immortal who dares to compete with him. He couldn't look for interior masters at all. As for exterior masters, they were either people who admired him or those who were wanted. Either way, they weren't suitable. If we can't find anyone in the half-immortal realm who can contend against him, we will be in trouble in this war. Why don't we use the sun god to push him up? This was also a method, although it was a bit embarrassing. Moreover, doing so was destined to have a considerable loss of sun god. That shit stirrer was famous for being ruthless. Before he became a half-immortal, the number of sun god resentful spirits in his hands was already more than 10. He perfectly inherited the killing methods of the great demon in Xuanyuan's sword vein. In the cultivation world, they were most afraid of this kind of person. Once an individual's strength broke through a certain limit, even if they were alone, there was really nothing you could do to kill a top cultivator in a realm. They were really not to be offended. The monk of the 5 dynasties waited for everyone to complain and find nothing. Only then did they look at him and speak. Lu Tixing? Is it him? Who can be sure? Have any of you seen him? A little Buddha with limited experience and 2 frightened bodhisattvas. Let us be in a state of panic. Seeing everyone pondering, the 5 dynasties felt disdain in their hearts. These guys from small places did not have enough experience and courage, and their strategies were even more limited. This kind of situation would be really difficult to withstand in the future changes of the universe. He reminded them, why must we target him? Why must we seek the help of our half-immortals? This is the war of the origin world. Can a half-immortal really be involved in it and create endless killing? We are not from the Han River realm. We are not heretics. We are also the mainstream of the universe's cultivation world. The karma involved in this is very big. Seeing that the monks were deep in thought, he continued, we will pretend that we don't know. We don't know that there is such a person. We don't know who he is. What is his purpose here? We don't know at all. Just continue to fight us. I don't believe that he can really stay in the Scarlet Swordsman group forever. And then keep killing our bodhisattvas and Buddhas? If that is really the case, we don't even need to do anything. Heavens, I will first restrain him. The monks suddenly understood. A great Buddha said with a smile, Master's view is really high. When he comes back, I will let the 3 disciples who met him by chance return to the realm. If there is a day when we confront each other, we will pretend to be lost. The universe is vast and there are countless accidents. Who can say for sure? 5 dynasties nodded. Exactly. This person purposely spread the news that he is Lu Xiaoyi. What is his purpose? Doesn't he want us to take the initiative to contact him? Once we contact him, we will immediately lose the initiative. How can we talk? How can we talk? How can we continue to fight? If the tempo runs to his side and involves the inner and outer realm, we will find out as we talk. What, there is nothing for us to do? Is this what you want to see? Why don't we just pretend to be deaf and dumb? Do what you have to do. Not only do you have to do it, you have to do it on a grand scale. Let's see how he fights against the army of cultivators with his own strength. If he wins, he will kill countless lives and destroy his Tao path. If he loses, his reputation will be ruined and his face will be lost. What will we lose? We are all ordinary cultivators of the origin world. We are neither half-immortals nor monsters. There is no need to be so particular. The monks clapped their hands and cheered. As expected of a senior monk of the great sage heavens. His act of pretending to be deaf and dumb was deep in karma. A great Buddha asked, Master 5 dynasties, what do you mean by war? Are we not going to waste their time? 5 Dynasties sighed. If this person doesn't come, it doesn't matter if we waste the time of those rats. Let them eat more wisdom dust and star explosion. Their morale will be even lower. The reason why we don't fight is because we are not willing to suffer too many losses. But that was then, and this is now. The situation has changed, so we naturally can't stick to the rules. This person's thoughts are unpredictable and cunning. If we wait for a long time, who knows what kind of tricks he will come up with. Why don't we take advantage of the time when he has not stabilized his footing and the situation is unclear to strike star explosion? We will go all out and lose more people to make him helpless. If we drag this out too long, it will be disadvantageous to us. Chapter 1962. There were some great Buddhas who were dissatisfied. Of course you don't care, there's no one from the great sage heavens. Thus, he tactfully suggested, do you want to reconsider? After all, the universe is changing, and people are valuable. The 5 Dynasties knew that he had to persuade these people. Otherwise, when this sh*t Lu came, who knew what kind of trouble he would cause? There are many reasons, tactical and strategic. Everyone is smart and can see it clearly, so I won't say more. I will only say one thing, the movements of the Taoists in the Western paradise. Looking at the serious expressions on everyone's faces, he knew that this was the most important point. In a realm war, the Taoists have always been a hindrance. This is not only to prevent these heretical sects from being destroyed, but also to help them when they are attacked. In the Western paradise, it is impossible for us to attack both the Taoists and the heretical sects at the same time, so this bad habit has formed. When we attack the heretical sects, the Taoists will leak information from the back and make all kinds of small movements. When we attack the Taoists, these heretical sects will jump up and down and make all kinds of trouble. This has become the cancer of the Western paradise. What he said was very true, and it was indeed so. However, this was the environment. When the boss wanted to deal with people, the subordinates would naturally choose to band together. It was the same in the Eastern paradise. The Taoists were the strongest, but the cancer became the Buddhists and the heretical sections. Cancer also depended on the environment, and under different circumstances, it could become benign. The mustard worm disease is originally not surprising, but after this person comes, some fundamental things may change. The great name of Lu Xing is not only known in the sword vein, but also in the Taoists. It is a bit of a bootlicker. If he were to take the lead, the previous small skirmishes and disturbances would most likely evolve into a true alliance. When the Orthodox school and the Taoist school join forces, everyone, have you thought about the consequences? The 5 Dynasties waved his hand. Therefore, we don't have time, so we can only end this quickly. Strive to give Scarlet a fatal blow before this person spreads his influence completely. Some losses had to be endured, and it was impossible for them to fight steadily and surely like before. If you are willing, I will personally arrange this battle. If not, it is better for everyone to make plans early and simply make peace. That way, we won't be able to get out of this embarrassing situation if the losses are too great. Silence. The words of the 5 Dynasties could not be regarded as alarmist talk to scare people. There was a very profound reason behind it. That sh*t Stick Lu had ascended high and shouted that he wanted to carry out a color struggle in the Western paradise. Let's not talk about whether it would succeed or not, but the Western paradise would definitely be stirred up into a puddle of shit. The stench was overwhelming and intoxicating. The 5 Dynasties looked at everyone's expressions and calculated in their hearts. Actually, there was a very important reason that he had not said yet. The reason he had attacked Scarlet in advance was because he had been invited by the Eastern Heavens Buddhists. Due to the failure of the Eastern Heaven, the Buddhists had placed all their resentment on the 5 rings, especially the sword vein. They couldn't do anything to Shen Yuan in the Eastern Sky because the Taoist alliance in the Eastern Sky was stable and unassailable. Therefore, they could only set their sights on the other mammoths. Among the four heavens, the Western heaven was the most suitable. Buddhism was the strongest, and there was also the Crimson Sword vein, which was not weak at all. This was the reason why the great sage Heavens couldn't say anything about this alliance. If there was a ghost in his heart, then no matter what he saw, there would be a ghost. The moment this sh*Tlu came, the five dynasties' first thought was that this bastard was here to take revenge on the Buddhists. He was here to cause trouble on purpose. To stir up sh*T. Now that he had come across a huge sh*T pit like Scarlet, it would be strange if he didn't want to stir this sh*T pit into a lake. Since they couldn't directly destroy him, they could only take drastic measures and clean up the sh*T pit that was Scarlet first. Since my great sage Heavens is the leader of this alliance, we will naturally not stay out of it completely. How about this? My great sage Heavens will appear and contact a few half-immortals to be in charge of restraining this person during the Battle of Star Explosion. This way, you will only need to deal with the Scarlet Swordsman. You don't have to worry too much about the killing power of this sh*Tlu. You will be able to reduce the casualties to an acceptable level. If you are unwilling to go all out with such conditions, I think there is no need for this alliance to exist anymore. The expressions of the monk shook. After talking for so long, this was the most realistic sentence. However, there was still a great Buddha who was not at ease. I wonder where the half-immortals' reinforcements are. How long will it take for them to arrive? The five dynasties disdained these useless people and replied, actually, these reinforcements are nearby. This is just a precautionary measure. How can my great sage Heavens not consider everything before doing things? Only then did the monks let go of their worries. If there was someone specifically targeting that sh*Tlu, they were willing to bear the remaining losses. After all, how could there be no losses in a long expedition? The five dynasties' threat of Taoism was not false. It really existed and was not an exaggeration. Seeing that everyone nodded in agreement, the five dynasties smiled and said, "The Scarlet Swordsman thinks that he is familiar with the terrain and can hide in the star explosion without anyone noticing. Actually, he doesn't know that we have long known their movements and we're just waiting for the right time. Now that the time has come, everyone, let's close the door and beat the dog." Beating the dog was not easy. The key was whether they could close the door. There were too many doors in the universe. Luckily, they had an absolute advantage in terms of numbers. As long as they were willing to pay the price, war was like this. It was always constantly challenging your bottom line. At first, they thought that they could do it without bloodshed. Later, it became a guerrilla war. Now, it became an encirclement war. Their tolerance for casualties was also getting looser and looser. They hoped that they would not relax until they could leave alive. The uniqueness of the Scarlet Sword vein was troublesome for the Scarlet Swordsman, but wasn't it the same for their enemies? They wanted to use it for their own use, but they also wanted to peacefully pass through it. They also wanted to show off their strength. The result of having too many ideas was that none of them could be realized. It was better to kill them as if they were mortal enemies from the beginning. The two universe wars in the eastern sky had already passed several hundred years ago. However, there were not many people who could really learn anything from it. At least, the Western Sky Buddhist sect did not learn anything. The alliance began to mobilize. This was also a process that required time. However, according to the five dynasties' analysis, even if that sh*Tlu's journey was smooth sailing without any delays, it would still take more than a month from the time they discovered him to the star explosion. Therefore, they had enough time to mobilize. Perhaps, they could even catch up to the star explosion before he found the Scarlet Sword vein. Under such expectations, the entire alliance's movements were quite fast. The Buddhist sect forces of all the domains surrounded the star explosion from afar. By the time the army formation was perfect and the preparation conditions for the attack were met, only a month had passed. The five dynasties swept away their previous dissatisfaction. The Buddhist sect forces' actions when they saw danger were still remarkable. This was the foundation of success. Everyone, don't worry. The half-immortals are already in place. You can attack as you please. On the horizon, there were 3 indistinct auras. They were half-immortals. This was undoubtedly a reassuring pill, giving the forces of the Alliance a great deal of confidence. This time, the Scarlet Swordsman would not be able to escape. Chapter 1963. Lu Xiaoyi was inspecting the Crimson Sect's martial arts heritage, claiming that he was trying to find a way to get the best of both worlds. In fact, he was secretly learning from them. It was necessary to secretly learn from the Crimson Sect because the martial arts here were all authentic Buddhist martial arts, and most of the Tao states were also authentic Buddhist Tao states. For example, he was unfamiliar with the Yin virtue, good fortune, nirvana, karma, and so on. These were the most common Tao states here. To him, this was a treasure trove. Such a good thing could not be found in the 5th ring. Since he was a swordsman and a monk, there was no pressure to secretly learn from them. Well, it was not stealing, but he was guiding them in their cultivation as a friend of the Crimson Cloud ancestor from the upper realm. Of course, he had the qualifications and the ability to do so. He was a little weak in the Tao states of Buddhism, but he had a basic understanding of them. However, his understanding of the sword was 10 times better than these people. Just a few words of advice would be enough to make these great Buddhas feel infinitely better. Who would have thought that a demigod could secretly learn from them? However, Lu Xing knew how to do so. Under his unfathomable gaze, the Crimson Swordsman took out their trump card and showed it to this young senior, just to get 1 or 2 pertinent comments. Most importantly, Lu Xing did not hide anything. His comments were always sharp and accurate, and the advice he gave was even more imaginative. Not taking shortcuts was not only brilliant, but also practical. This made the Crimson Swordsman completely addicted to it. They could not wait to show everything they had to get guidance from a demigod who had already proven himself on the cultivation stage of the universe. This was very important. In these 10 days, the Buddhas surrounded Lu Xing just like that, as if they had forgotten that they were still in the middle of a war, and treated this place as a Zen sword gathering. They gained a lot. However, on the 10th day, Long Tan could not hold it in anymore. Seeing that his fellow disciples were so immersed in the Zen sword that they had all forgotten their original purpose, he asked, "Inspector, 10 days have passed, and there is no news at all. Do you think we should take the initiative to contact them?" Lu Xiaoyi was in the mood to steal, and he did not expect 10 days to pass in the blink of an eye. It's already been 10 days? There is no news at all? Zhao Jian stood up. I am in charge of external communication. Over the past 10 days, we've sent a few more people to contact you, but there's really no valuable information. It's all the usual stuff, and none of it is what you're looking for. Inspector, can you give us a direction? So that we can pay attention? Lu Xiaoyi thought for a moment. No? If there is nothing, then there is nothing. Actually, I don't know what news there is. Tell everyone to gather. Xian Yuan won't take more than 10 breaths. What about you? Dragon Pool raised his eyebrows, showing no sign of weakness. Don't worry, Inquisitor. Our Crimson Sword Mountain won't be any slower. The Crimson Sword Swordsman was to Zhao Tuz's Swordsman and Swords S, Zhao Jian. They quickly gathered and lined up neatly. After more than 20 breaths, all the Crimson Sword cultivators, 15 great Buddhas, over 60 medium Buddhas, close to 200 small Buddhas, and close to 1,000 Bodhisattvas were all waiting for orders in the air. In terms of scale, they were not inferior to Xian Yuan, but they were inferior in terms of foundation and individual strength. These Zen swordsmen were on par with normal monks and Taoists of the same realm, but they did not have the indomitable momentum, and they did not have the foundation to kill enemies of a higher realm. Among the orthodoxies in the mid-sized domain, this was considered pretty good. The great Buddhas were very puzzled. Was he going to lecture them? To encourage them? Or to make arrangements for the next phase of the war? Inspector Zhao had not come into contact with any battlefield information in these 10 days. He was even more clueless about the situation between us and the enemy. He did not even bother to look at the nearby star charts. He only focused on teaching everyone to practice the sword. He might be a good swordsman, but he might not be a good commander. Unclear about the enemy and us, unclear about the situation. This kind of performance seemed to be inconsistent with his great achievements in the eastern sky. Everyone was guessing his intentions, but who would have thought that Inspector Liu would not say a word? He straightened his body and left, leaving only one sentence. "Follow me." They were somewhat baffled, but since he had said that the first year's activities would be arranged by him, they still had to comply on the surface. The 15 great Buddhas followed closely by the big and small Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. When the thousands of great cultivators were pulled together, an imposing aura spontaneously arose. Everyone looked at each other, not daring to ask, only blindly following. The speed inside the star explosion could not be increased. After 2 hours, they came out of the star explosion into the void of the universe, and Inspector Liu suddenly accelerated. This was no longer a patrol, but a rapid march. The speed was set at the maximum limit that the Crimson Bodhisattvas could bear. 2,000 people started running, and the atmosphere suddenly changed. What was the meaning of this? No one knew. Longtan Zhaoyang did not say anything when he saw it, only telling them not to fall behind. Whoever fell behind would be killed. This was no longer just a training exercise. In such a dreary march, Inspector Liu flew at the front from beginning to end. His direction was stable and unwavering. Obviously, this was not a coincidence. After running for 3 whole months, everyone was endlessly depressed. Their hearts were filled with pent-up anger, but they did not know where to vent it. A great Buddha asked, This is not bringing us back to the eastern sky, right? We are being naturalized. You didn't even inform us?" His thoughts were very universal, but also somewhat nonsensical. If they were really going to travel far away, they should go through the reverse space and take a large floating raft. Just like if a group of hoodlums went to another city to kill people, they would have to take a plane or a bus. Only when they went to the next street to kill people would they run with such an imposing aura. So, it seemed very contradictory. At this time, a weak voice rang out. It was Yu Tan, the Buddha who had led Inspector Liu back. I think, Inspector Liu's goal should be the Fate Awakening realm." Zhaoyang shouted sternly, "Why do you think so? Why didn't you say so earlier?" Yu Tan was very aggrieved. "I didn't know at first. When I sent Inspector Liu back, he asked me about the main boundaries of the Buddhist alliance, so I pointed it out to him on the star map. At that time, I just thought that Inspector Liu wanted to familiarize himself with the environment and opponents. Now, looking at this direction, we have been running for 3 months, so it must be the Fate Awakening realm. Inspector Liu is bringing us to the 5th ring to do business and slaughter the major realms of the alliance." There was no need to think, it must be so. This was the business that the 5th ring was most familiar with for tens of thousands of years. Slaughter the universe. It was just that previously, it was in the eastern elephant sky. The other 3 elephant sky were still out of reach. Now, they were spreading their experience to the western elephant sky. At this time, Liu Xiaoyi's divine sense entered the minds of everyone in the team. Goal, Fate Awakening realm. I will open the world's great membrane for you. Goal, kill F***Kurs, rob F***Kurs, swordsmen should be unrestrained. Chapter 1964. Zhao Jian was shocked. Enforcer, you can't do that. With such barbaric behavior, Scarlet and Western Heavens Buddhists will have no room to maneuver. Even if we want to become stray dogs, we can't do it. Liu Xiaoyi did not slow down. He could already see the vague outline of the Fate realm in front of him, and it was gradually becoming clearer. He smiled ferociously and reprimanded loudly, "Do you know why Shan Yuan, who is also a sword vein, is doing so well in the Eastern Heaven, and the Taoists can only tolerate and rely on him, but you, Scarlet, are doing so cautiously in the Western Heaven, hiding your head and shrinking your tail, and the Buddhists want to destroy and control you? Just a little. When I, Shan Yuan, established my sect, I was always ready to perish together with anyone who came to attack me. If you bite me once, I'll bite you back 10 times. If you destroy my sect, then we can all forget about it." Because of this, after so many tens of thousands of years, fewer and fewer people dared to bite me, Shan Yuan. On the contrary, there were more and more people who showed goodwill, and we all had Tao veins and improved together. You have to throw caution to the wind first, then there will be a future. Otherwise, you will be like now, being chased around like a dog. If you go to the Eastern Heaven and ask around, only I, Shan Yuan, chased people away. When has there ever been a case of someone else chasing Shan Yuan away? You still want to become a stray dog? How dare you say that? A sword vein can become a vicious dog, a mad dog, or a dead dog, but you can't become a stray dog. If you run this time, you are destined to run forever. His roar made the Scarlet Swordsmen blush, and they were all ashamed. Shame and ferociousness appeared at the same time, and they only felt that a mouthful of resentment was about to spew out. Seeing that the Fate realm was close, he pointed his hand, and millions of sword lights rushed out. The 5 Grand Tao realms rotated, digging a big hole in the world's great membrane. The boundary shook, and the spiritual opportunity suddenly changed. He pointed at the big hole. You are not qualified to be called swordsman now. If you want to be a swordsman, first be a robber. If you don't blacken first, how can you bleach? Get down, all of you. Don't come up until you've dyed your battle robes red and filled your storage rings. Lu Xiaoyi's words were a little too much. It was normal for the Crimson Swordsmen to fight and kill. Since they were able to cultivate the way of the sword, their bloodlust would definitely be much greater than that of other orthodoxies. Under Lu Xing's disdainful gaze, the swordsmen did not hesitate to dive into the hole in the macrocosm. For several years, many of their fellow disciples were killed in battle. Their homes were destroyed, and it was difficult for them to return to their homeland. If they threw away the scruples of not tolerating Buddhism in the Western paradise, what else could they not do? The sword faction was in the lead, but the Zen faction had no choice. In the surging flood, how could they give you time to think carefully? A Zen great Buddha was still pacing back and forth at the entrance of the cave when he was kicked in by Lu Xiaoyi. He scolded, "What are you thinking by blocking the latrine door and thinking about life? If there's another one, I'll stab him with my sword." Without exception, all the Crimson Swordsmen were chased into the Fate Awakening realm by him, but he did not go in himself. This was not his battle, and the Crimson Swordsman could only rely on himself. Moreover, he had to be on guard against existences that were beyond the scope of the main world, such as half-immortals. The Fate Awakening realm was one of the main forces of the Alliance. In fact, in terms of realm strength, it might not be as strong as the Crimson Swordsman, but it was a lineage of Buddhism. Half of its combat strength had left after participating in the battle, and it was only a portion of its combat strength. It was easy to imagine the remaining strength. Ransacking the realm was not a problem, but the problem was whether or not one's heart could be as hard as iron and merciless. There was a paradox: the more you cared about the suffering of the people, the more likely you were to kill. In the end, you would suffer unnecessary losses and your opponents would be slaughtered. This was because you left a false impression on your opponents that they could resist. The correct idea was to intimidate the enemy from the start and use bloodshed to suppress them. The advantage of this was that many people with weak wills would choose to compromise, retreat, and protect themselves. They would not be able to kill many people. This was the experience of a fifth ring swordsman. As long as no half-immortals appeared, he would not make a move, even if the Crimson Swordsman suffered heavy losses. Judging from the current situation, the process was not going well. The Crimson Swordsman was not ruthless enough, and could not intimidate the situation. Therefore, the resistance was very intense, and they were in a stalemate. Even though they had the advantage in numbers, they still fought to this extent. The key was not strength, but mentality. The Crimson Swordsman was not mentally prepared to be a competent bandit. There was no time to slowly polish this, and he could only learn through actual combat. Now was the best opportunity. At the very least, they still had the advantage in numbers. In the end, even if they had fewer people, they would still be able to attack fiercely. Unable to attack? Then he would just destroy the sect. There was nothing he could not accept. For a sect like the Swordsman, if you could not even pretend to be tough, then what was the value of your existence? Just like a street gangster, you could not just bully people with a body full of tattoos. You had to fight bare-chested in a few rounds. This was what he could do for the Crimson Swordsman. He still hoped that the sword vein would be controlled by the swordsman. In fact, when he went to the tail of the comet, he already had this idea, so Yutin's guess was right. The reason why he waited for 10 days was to wait for the Western Buddhist sect's response. If they knew that he was coming, they would have to have an attitude. He did not know much about the Western Buddhist sect, so he could only test them like this. If the Alliance was smart enough, whether they invited the half-immortals to mediate, or if the Alliance simply came forward to sit down and talk, this war would probably end there. Although the process was easy, it was not good for the Crimson Swordsman. He could not stay here forever. After he left for a few hundred years, the contract binding would become powerless, and the next attack would not be as wishy-washy as this time. The Crimson Swordsman was the real danger. There was no news at all. The Alliance was pretending to be stupid. It could not be a problem of not being able to respond. It could only be that the higher-ups of the Alliance had decided to ignore his existence, pretend that they did not see him, and do whatever they wanted. They were betting that the Crimson Swordsman, as a half-immortal, would not dare to interfere in the battle of the lower realm. If that was the case, the Crimson Swordsman might have a chance to survive. Of course, he would not choose to fight. If he was a Xinyuan swordsman, he would do so. A few separate attacks would solve the problem, but the Crimson Swordsman could not do that now. Therefore, the bandit strategy was the most effective. The people of the Eastern Heaven understood that a group of swordsmen without a home was the most terrifying. If you want to fight a swordsman, you must first build an incomparably strong turtle shell for your own home. If my home is gone, then everyone's home is gone too. If I have no cultivation backup, then everyone will have no backup. Let's see who can hold on. He was not worried about time. The Crimson Swordsman was a realm, so there would not be a big problem in terms of unity. The opponent was an alliance, each with their own thoughts, so it was only a matter of time before a problem occurred. The Western Heaven was led by the Buddhist sect, but it was not completely under the Buddhist sect's control. He understood the thoughts of those Taoists too well. If they did not take this opportunity to cause trouble, how could they be called Taoists? The Buddhist sect often said, "Fellow Taoist, please wait." The Taoist sect often said, "Master, I am coming." Chapter 1965. Lu Xiaoyi waited outside for a day, but no demigods came looking for trouble. This was expected. Their movements were completely untraceable, so it was impossible to find their whereabouts so quickly. A day later, the Scarlet Swordsmen returned to the outer space one by one. Their losses were still within an acceptable range, but they were a bit battered and exhausted. At the very least, they had fulfilled Lu Xing's request. They were all covered in blood, and their storage rings were half full. Long Tan and Zhao Jian's expressions were not too good. They knew that their performance was barely satisfactory. The swordsmen had the advantage in numbers, and they also had the advantage of surprise attacks. This should not be the case. Kill like lightning, hide the heart of a bodhisattva. This wasn't just for show. Instead, there was a profound philosophy behind it. The Scarlet Man was no stranger to this. Lu Xiaoyi did not say anything. Assemble, set out. This time, he did not need to say anything. Everyone knew what he meant. They were going to attack the next target. As for resting, running while resting was never a problem for cultivators. Great Buddha Zhao Jian said cautiously, "Xing, can you tell us the destination?" "Actually, we are very familiar with the environment here, including the negative space." Lu Xiaoyi glanced at him. This was being forced to do something beyond his ability. After killing once, he had nothing left to lose. The Zen and Sword systems did not argue. Everyone was from the Scarlet Swordsman system. You could not say that you were from the Zen system. They had killed very few people, so they were very restrained in robbing. Once this boat got on, it was impossible to get off. A day later, the Scarlet Swordsman group entered the negative space. As the host, the Scarlet Swordsmen knew the location of the negative space around them. They were not too stupid, and usually knew to collect and accumulate such strategic information. In fact, they were using it now. Since they had already reached this point, it did not matter who they robbed next. There was no need to argue. Long Tan hesitated for a moment, but still opened his mouth. "Xing." If Xian Yuan was the one doing it, what would the result be? Lu Xiaoyi said decisively, if Xian Yuan was the one doing it, the casualties in the target domain would be reduced by at least half. The harvest would at least be doubled. Furthermore, the number of casualties he suffered would be in the single digits, or even within a single palm strike. Not only Xian Yuan, but also the entire 5 rings. If they couldn't do that, in the past 20,000 years of hunting, be it Xian Yuan or the 5 rings, they would have long been wiped out. He didn't tell them the reason and let them think about it themselves. Actually, it wasn't hard to guess. It was just a matter of mentality. You can't unleash your potential only after you've been forced into a desperate situation. Instead, you should unleash your potential at any time and place. Reality will tell you that when you erupt, there will be more people and forces that choose to cower than you think. Long Tan and Zhao Jian returned to the swordsman group. The group was there to sum up their experience and look for all kinds of unsatisfactory performances during the first raid. Some were in terms of willpower, and of course, some were in terms of arrangements. Some were too disorderly, and the targets were scattered. The so-called experience would only be more fragrant if it was verified with one's own blood. One would never forget it. This time, it was different. He had a target, a specific opponent, the distribution of the major sects and forces in the target domain, where resources were abundant, where treasures were good, where he might encounter stronger resistance, where insignificant and important people would stay behind to guard the domain. More than 10 days later, outside the bitter tree world, more than 1,000 crimson swordsmen were in an orderly formation, their killing intent soaring. Everyone knew what they were doing and where they stood. This allowed them to unleash greater power as a whole. This time, Lu Xiaoyi did not motivate anyone, nor did he scold anyone to provoke them. Some methods could only be used once. If they were used too many times, they would lose their effect and produce negative results. The Buddhist swordsman was growing rapidly. After all, their foundation was still there. It was just a process of adjusting their state of mind. It was still the sword light that opened the heaven and earth grand membrane. This was a small result of his research on the combination of Tao realms over the years. The Khanate 5 manifestations were especially targeted at such a fixed defense system that was built according to the momentum of the universe. Then, he was still waiting. He was calculating when those half-immortals would be able to catch up. This time would not be too long. He was a half-immortal himself. Of course, he knew the ability of half-immortals. What was not certain was, how much of a variable could he, the shit-stick Lu, play here? Would they not come if they knew he was here? It was very possible. Then, how long could this kind of surprise attack continue? It was definitely impossible to go through all the combinations of the Alliance forces. Where was the limit? Where was the limit of the Western Heaven Buddhist sect's pressure tolerance? He did not know. In order to understand this process as soon as possible, he knew that he could no longer smash here and there like this after this battle. He did not care about himself, but he had to prevent the Crimson Swordsman from falling into the encirclement of the Alliance. How to solve this? He could not rely on himself to get dizzy. He needed eyes. Where were the eyes? It was definitely not the Crimson Swordsman. Their target was too big, and their size was not enough. Then, he was afraid there was only one choice, the Taoists of the Western Heaven. He could make such a big move here because he was gambling. He was gambling that those Western Heaven monsters would come looking for him. Especially those from the interior heaven. He hoped that not everyone would stay in the interior heaven, right? A day later, the Crimson Swordsman came out of the big hole in the macro-membrane. Just by looking at their expressions, one could tell whether this battle had gone smoothly or not. Long Tan and Zhao Jian flew over in high spirits. We returned with a full load. We killed 47 of the opponents and lost 13 of them. They were basically all bodhisattvas. It was a very good result. One had to know that this was the secondary world-breaking war. To be able to achieve this level, the weakness of the Crimson Swordsman was one of the reasons. The change in mentality of the Crimson Swordsman and the tight organization played a very big role. Very good. So, do you think we should continue? If we continue, which target is more suitable to choose? Can we have an unexpected effect? Lu Xiaoyi decided on the first and second targets. He did not intend to interfere anymore. It should be up to the Crimson Swordsman to decide. In the future, they could only rely on themselves. Long Tan was very cautious. He did not forget himself just because of 2 successes. This was the basic quality of a great Buddha. According to our analysis, after the Fate Awakening Dharma realm was attacked, the fastest way to get the news will be through the main force of the Alliance in a month, which is now. Then they will quickly send the news to the various domains of the Alliance to strengthen their defenses. We don't know whether the Alliance will fall apart because of this, but according to the usual style of the Western Heaven Buddhist sect, they will not be willing to suffer losses like this. They will focus on how to catch us again. In theory, we still have time to sneak attack another domain. Then we will have to stop for a while and see how the other parties react. Our opinion is to choose the farthest domain of the Alliance because it takes time for the news to be sent back. If we go through the reverse space, there is a big chance that we can catch up with the news before it is sent back. Lu Xiaoyi nodded and asked, "Have you considered the possible role of the Western Heaven demigods in there?" Chapter 1966. Long Tan Zhaojian was startled. They really did not consider this, because it was too far away from them. Their habitual thinking made them not consider the factor of half-immortals when considering problems. This kind of thinking originally was not wrong, but now was different from the past. Zhaojian frowned. "Enforcer, we do not know much about the abilities of half-immortals. Is there anything you want to remind us?" Lu Xiaoyi said softly, "They will pass the news over in a very short period of time, not a month as you think. In extreme cases, it may only take a few days. Therefore, it is not appropriate for you to use the normal time to arrange the target of the Scarlet Strike Group. It should be more psychological." The 2 great Buddhas nodded silently. After a long time, Long Tan opened his mouth. "Then, can we carry out the second backup target? Attack the Scarlet Star and wipe out the remaining forces of the Alliance above." Lu Xiaoyi nodded. "Very good idea. It is a bit like the swordsman moving unhindered in the universe. At least, you have a deeper understanding of how swordsmen fight guerrilla warfare in the void of the universe." Zhao Jian let out a long breath. However, the pressure of half-immortals was still very big. Although the true strength of these monstrous half-immortals did not pose an absolute threat to them, relying on the inner and outer scenic sky would still increase countless variables. Enforcer, you mean that there are already half-immortals on the Alliance's side? Lu Xiaoyi sighed, this may be my fault. If I did not appear, they would not have appeared. Long Tan nodded, I understand. But Enforcer, your appearance is not on the same level as theirs. Our Scarlet Strike group has taken a big advantage. You see, Before he finished speaking, he had already looked to the side. Enforcer, they are here. Lu Xiaoyi smiled, get ready, we will leave in a while. They are indeed here, but this may be a friend. Lu Xiaoyi's figure leaped and disappeared without a trace. When he reappeared, a familiar figure was faintly discernible in the background of the universe. Lu Xiaoyi smiled, I knew it was you. In the Western Heaven, there's probably no one else who has such great ability to find us so quickly. Duanli laughed out loud. It's not that I'm capable, but that the Taoists have a wide reach. Furthermore, it's the enforcers who do good deeds. Several large Taoist realms in the Western Heaven were still discussing whether they should organize a joint operation to teach the Buddhists of the Western Heaven a lesson. All these years, the actions of the Western Paradise Buddhists have been getting more and more unbridled. We have long wanted to make a move against them. To be able to wait for the arrival of the greatest destroyer of the Taoist sect of the universe, is this the will of the heavens? Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. You think too highly of me. I'm just abusing an exterior-level swordsman's trust. I didn't come to the Western Paradise to cause trouble. I may cause trouble, but I won't do things that won't benefit me. Duanli laughed heartily. After the two of them parted, there was naturally a scene. It was true that the Taoists of the Western Heaven wanted to make a move, but it was only in the mood. To put it into action, there was still too much preparation to do. How could it be completed in a few months or years? The Eastern Heaven Buddhists had at least hundreds of thousands of years to prepare for the First Cosmic War, and that was because the Eastern Heaven Buddhists were relatively concentrated. In the Western Heaven, several large Taoist realms were relatively scattered. It was extremely inconvenient to travel a distance of thousands of years, so it was impossible to arrange at all. Duanli's visit was actually more of a representation of himself. In the interior heaven, there were also monsters of the Western Heaven Buddhists. For example, Hands-Free was a hidden ascetic monk. When the interior heaven chose the head of the enforcers, he was chosen as the second enforcer. At that time, most people thought that it was because Marching Monk and Lu Xiaoyi were both in the Eastern Heaven. In order not to monopolize the Eastern Heaven, he wasn't chosen. But in the eyes of people like Lu Xiaoyi and Duanli, it wasn't necessarily so. This monk was very skilled, and he didn't completely wear the same pants as Marching Monk. He was a person with a story. It's fine. If it was on speakerphone, I'd probably come alone. Come to an agreement. Everyone would try to turn big problems into small ones and small ones into nothing. He wouldn't use force. After all, he wasn't a military monk. It was true that the steamed bun seller and the steamed bun seller were enemies, but that was only if they were on the same street. If they were not in the same city, they would not be able to reach each other, right? He wouldn't fall out with me because of this, and I wouldn't either. But I reckon that the possibility of him falling out with you is higher. This time, it was Duanli's turn to smile bitterly. This was because Lu Xiaoyi could tell at a glance that there was another reason for his visit. Other than wanting to lend a hand, Duanli had dared to come here because he wanted to kill the monk. But the problem was that his ability might not reach his expectations. Cultivators were like this. A battle of magical powers was a battle of magical powers, and victory and defeat were victory and defeat. However, a battle of life and death was another matter altogether. In a battle of magical powers, you could rely on a slightly superior move to gain a slight advantage, but this advantage could not determine life and death. Therefore, in most battle scenarios, victory and defeat were easy to determine, but life and death were difficult to grasp. Swordsman was strong in this aspect. They were often clumsy in terms of victory and defeat. Watching the battle scene, it was as if they were being beaten up. However, they were the last to survive. This ability was what many orthodoxies feared about the sword vein. Duan Li and Hands-Free were both in the Western Paradise. Needless to say, their relationship was obvious. Their strength could determine victory and defeat, but it was difficult to determine life and death. This was something that Duan Li did not wish to see. Therefore, he came here to borrow Lu Xiaoyi's ability to determine life and death. Lu Xiaoyi rejected him directly. It was easy for him to determine life and death, but what would he do after that? Would he just leave the Crimson Sword vein to fend for itself? Therefore, he directly told Duan Li that if Hands-Free came to provoke him, he would help Duan Li kill him. However, if Hands-Free only wanted to be a peacemaker, Lu Xiaoyi would choose to accept. Duan Li's vision was focused on the conflict between Western Paradise's Taoists and Buddhists, while his was focused on the survival of the Crimson Sword vein. Their starting points were different, so naturally, their judgments were different. Duan Li nodded, expressing his understanding. I understand. In this cultivation world, there are various circles of power entangling endlessly. Everyone has their own choices. We are friends, but it doesn't mean that we have to agree on everything. If Hands-Free dares to provoke the Enforcer, I will do my best to help the Enforcer and kill this monk. If this bald donkey is tactful and knows to come over to mediate, then he will have dodged a bullet. If the Enforcer is in trouble, I will still do my best. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Good, that's a friend. There's still a long time, so why the rush? Speaking of which, the Western Paradise is your territory. I'm blind here, but I do have a lot to ask of you. Duan Li was also very straightforward. Enforcer, just say it. The main reason I'm here is to see if I can help you. As for Hands-Free, it's like gathering grass to beat a rabbit. It's best if you can catch him, but it doesn't matter if you can't. Chapter 1967. The Western Heavens Buddhist army approached Planet Comet. As they were afraid of being detected, their encirclement was very restrained. As the army gathered and began to squeeze towards the center, the Buddhist higher-ups began to feel that something was wrong. It was too quiet. It was so quiet that it was abnormal. It was just like an empty planet. A great Buddha asked, could it be that they escaped from inside Planet Comet? The 5 dynasties shook their heads. How could they make such a simple mistake? Send some people in and see if there are any traces left behind. A cultivator's divine sense was like a radar. With thousands of people surrounding them, no one could completely hide their presence. If they still could not sense it by now, then there was no one left. Not long after, news came that Planet Comet was empty. The Scarlet Swordsman group had gone to the starry sky and there was no trace of them. The Alliance's higher-ups fell into a dead silence. They were not sure if this was a normal troop movement by the Scarlet Swordsman, or if they had sensed the Alliance's movements and thus left early. In theory, there were many people in the Alliance, so it was indeed difficult to completely cover their tracks. But there were too many unknowns and too many variables in this. Everyone began to investigate internally to see if there were any recent movements, such as those who had deliberately left and other such possibilities, but the 5 dynasties did not think much of it. Although this operation was huge, they did not inform the Alliance of their destination before they flew to Planet Comet. In the early stages, they had already sent trusted scouts to remotely control them, afraid that the Scarlet Swordsman group would run away. It was common knowledge that an army was most afraid of missing their target. They had already done their best to maintain secrecy and remote control in the early stages, and they had made such a decision very quickly. They had basically made the decision immediately after receiving Lutong. Even with such speed, they still missed their target. The worst thing has happened. I think we don't need to catch the mole in our own ranks and cause everyone to be anxious and feel threatened. Actually, the biggest possibility is that the Scarlet Swordsman group has started to change their strategy after that person arrived. They are going to go wild. I've heard from my fellow Buddhists in the eastern sky that those sword cultivators are best at wandering around in the void of the universe. They go to the east and then to the west. They don't have a fixed target, and they don't have a fixed route. If that's the case, it will be difficult to find them. A Buddha asked, "Wasn't the Scarlet Swordsman like this before?" "It's all guerrilla warfare, what's the difference?" The 5 dynasties explained, "It's completely different. Scarlet's guerrilla warfare is passive. Their goal is to protect the Scarlet Planet and entangle with our army. Their vision is not broad enough, and they are not brave enough. They lack the determination to die together with us. The Eastern Sky Swordsman is different. I reckon that they must have raided someone's lair. There are 16 realms in the Alliance, and all of them are possible." Only then did everyone understand. Carefully thinking about it, this was most in line with the Eastern Sky Swordsman's way of doing things. If it was another person, it would be impossible for them to immediately obtain the authority to control the Scarlet Buddha sword vein, but this little swordsman Lu was different. One of the Buddhas started to panic. "What should we do? If the Scarlet people really go to our respective realms to cause trouble, almost none of our forces will be able to stop them." Returning to their respective domains was definitely the worst solution. The breakup of the alliance was exactly what they wanted. But if we just wait like this, how can we determine their next target in 16 domains? Some Buddhas were very attentive. "Great Master, since this person's intention is to bring the Scarlet people around to plunder our domains, why didn't he act quietly? Directly come into contact with the Scarlet people and wander around in a large area? Why did he have to report his name? Isn't that unnecessary?" The 5 dynasties was very bitter. Even if his wisdom was unparalleled, encountering such an evildoer gave him a headache. He had to answer this question, and he had to answer truthfully. Otherwise, it would cause more and more suspicions in the alliance. He reported his name first, waiting for us to take the initiative to negotiate. If we didn't talk, he would bring people to make a move. Everyone, think carefully. Under the circumstances at that time, could we have taken the initiative to negotiate? As long as we negotiated, we would have immediately eased the Scarlet people's predicament. If this continued without end, the alliance would have come in vain in the end. He admitted the reason himself, and on the contrary, received everyone's approval. Yes, under the circumstances at that time, thousands of alliance cultivators had gathered. If you came, I would have to negotiate with you. Then there would be no need to fight this war. Even if we still had to negotiate in the end, we would have to fight a battle to determine victory and defeat. Only then would we have a better position at the negotiation table. Both sides had the same mentality. The only difference was that the alliance wanted to fight a war, while the Scarlet people were wandering outside. Their purpose was actually the same. Through war, they would force the other party to open negotiations. Naturally, they would have the initiative to negotiate terms. We can still hold on. But I don't know how long we can hold on. Our own domain is under attack, but the main force is doing nothing outside. The core question is, where will they target? Can anyone guess? Soon, someone pulled out a star map. Everyone looked at it for a long time, each with their own opinions, but they could not form a unified opinion. Only 1 out of 16. Even if they took into account the distance, it was impossible to make an accurate judgment. Everyone looked at the 5 dynasties. The old Buddha felt the great responsibility on his shoulders. Find a base point. But we know nothing about their attacking habits. Is the target of attack decided by the Scarlet people? Or is it decided by Lu Tong? I think it's the latter. Then what are his attacking habits? We have only heard of his reputation and deeds, but we don't know anything about his specific actions. So there's no point in making a choice now. So we can only wait for the news of our domain being attacked. Only after at least 1 or 2 attacks can we make a judgment about their attacking habits. That's the most reliable judgment. Some Buddhas were very dissatisfied. Do you mean that we don't have to do anything now? Just wait for the disaster to come? Whoever is unlucky deserves it. The lucky domain starts to worry about their fate in the next round? Anyway, the great holy heavens is definitely not in the list of attack. The 5 dynasties suppressed the anger in his heart. He knew that he could not be angry now. Once he was angry, the alliance would immediately collapse. There would be no turning back. He looked at everyone and said in a low voice, "A strong force must be a force that can withstand the test of time. It's not just good times, it's also bad times. Death is everywhere, and losses are everywhere. We can't control these. But what we can control is that when death and losses come, we can still maintain a strong will. This is true strength. In any war, there are countless mistakes in the process. But it doesn't matter. When the final battle comes, who can say for sure who will win? Persevere, and we still have a chance. Give up complaining, and we've already lost." I'll say 2 points. The losses of the domain being attacked will be borne by the entire alliance. The great holy heavens will take half of it. In addition, our half-immortal friends have already started to move. They will provide us with the most real-time information. All for the final attack. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.